Hello. Hey there. How's everyone doing? Busy day today. We're gonna have two streams. It's gonna be awesome. I'm gonna drink a sip of water. Just give me a moment. Ah, yes, that's nice. Always gotta remain hydrated, especially if I'm gonna be reading some more of this awesome book called A Game of Thrones by George R. Martin. Yeah, as you can probably tell, I'm actually pretty excited today. I'm full of energy. I'm pretty excited for Game of Thrones. I've been wanting to read so badly for the last couple days. I'm also very excited for Ori later today. That stream's gonna be in Spanish, so to anyone who's interested, come and check it out. Uh, and yeah, I'm actually well, what else is there to say? It's just a good day today. Um, just checking that my audio is working. So okay, so my microphone is actually activated. That's good. The other day, actually, I like it. Yesterday wasn't like I spent the first couple minutes like muted without realizing because apparently Streamlabs does not detect the microphone if you plug it into a different USB port. So that's good to know. I mean, I always plug it to the same one. Yesterday, I just plugged it into a different one for once, and that it didn't detect it. So it's good that I know now. It's good that I know now. And yeah, as you can see here, my my schedule today at 7. I'm also playing Ori. I'm so excited for that. Oh my god, you have no idea. And afterwards, I'm gonna have to do a bunch of homework. So yeah, today's gonna be a busy day, but I'm looking forward to it. Weirdly enough, I'm happy. I'm happy. So yeah, I mean, I'm just right now. I'm just waiting for a second, see if anyone joins in before I open up the book, just so that um, nobody misses anything. But if not, I could just start reading right away. And yeah, actually, I also feel really fresh right now. I took a I in the morning I took a shower, and then I took a nap right after that, and I woke up like an hour or two ago. So I'm actually very very I actually feel like very refreshed at the moment. I'm pretty happy with that. But all right. Let's see. Yeah, I'd say that's about it. Now let's actually start reading the book. Let's open up where we left off. We left off. Right. Last time, Daenerys told Khal Drogo that yes, he could do things to her. Um, so yeah, that's where we left off last time. And okay, today we're continuing actually we've already read 100 pages. Considering how small the text of this novel is, and how like cramped together it is, I say that we're going at a good rhythm, especially for only like 3 streams, I believe. Yeah, 3. This is the fourth one. Okay, so let's go. Let's just to jump right into it. Today we're starting with a Ned chapter, Eddard. And as always, I'm gonna try to do the voices, the accent of some characters. I cannot promise to try and do everyone, and I'll do my best. I'm not great at accents, but don't matter. I'm gonna do what I can. Okay, let us begin then. Um, the summons came in the hour before the dawn, when the world was still and grey. Aileen shook him roughly from his dreams, and Ned stumbled into a pre dawn chill, groggy from sleep, to find his horse saddled and the king already mounted. Robert wore thick brown gloves and a heavy fur coat, with a hood that covered his ears, and looked for all the world like a bear sitting a horse. "Up, Stark!" he roared. "Up, up! We have matters of state to discuss." "By all means," Ned said. Come inside, Your Grace. Ellen lifted the flap of the tent. No, 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 Robert said. His breath steamed with every word. The camp is full of ears. Besides, I want to ride out and taste this country of yours. Sir Boros and Sir Merrin waited behind him with a dozen guardsmen. Ned saw. There was nothing to do but rub the sleep from his eyes, dress, and mount up. Robert set the pace, driving his huge black destrier hard as Ned galloped along beside him, trying to keep up. He called out a question as they rode, but the wind blew his words away, and the king did not hear him. After that, Ned rode in silence. They soon left the king's road and took off across rolling plains dark with mist. By then, the guard had fallen back a small distance, safely out of earshot, but still Robert would not slow. Dawn broke as they crested a long ridge, and finally the king pulled up. By then, they were miles south of the main party. Robert was flushed and accelerated as Ned reined up beside him. Guts, he swore, laughing. Feels good to get out and ride. The way a man was meant to ride. I swear, Ned, this creeping along is enough to drive a man mad. Ned, okay, he had never been a patient man, Robert Baratheon. That damnable wheelhouse. The way it creaks and groans, climbing every bump in the road as if it were a mountain. I promise you, if that wretched thing breaks another axle, I'm going to burn it, and Cersei can walk. Ned laughed. I will gladly light a torch for you. Good man, the king clapped him on the shoulder. I've half a mind to leave them all behind and just keep going. A smile touched Ned's lips. I do believe you mean it. I do, the king said. What do you say, Ned? Just you and me, two vagabond knights on the king's road, or swords at our side and the gods know what in front of us, and maybe a farmer's daughter or a tavern wench to warm our beds tonight. Would that we could, Ned said. But we have duties now, my liege, to the realm and to our children. I to my lady wife, and you to your queen. We are not the boys we were. You were never the boy you were, Robert grumbled. More's the pity. And yet, there was that one time. What was her name? That common girl of yours, Becca? No, she was one of mine. Gods love her. Black hair and these sweet big eyes. You could drown in them. Yours was... Alina? No. You told me once. Was it Meryl? You know the one I mean, your bastard's mother. Her name was Wyla, Ned replied with cool courtesy. And I would sooner not speak of her. Wyla, yes, the king grinned. She must have been a rare wench if she could make Lord Eddard Stark forget his honor, even for an hour. You never told me what she looked like. Ned's mouth tightened in anger. No, will I? Leave it. Leave it be, Robert. For the love you say you bear me, I dishonored myself, and I dishonored Catelyn, in the sight of gods and men. Gods have mercy. You scarcely knew Catelyn. I had taken her to wife. She was carrying my child. You're too hard on yourself, Ned. You always were. Damn it, no woman wants Baelor the Blessed in her bed. He slapped a hand on his knee. Well, I'll not press you if you feel so strong about it. Though I swear, at times you're so prickly you ought to take the hedgehog as your sigil. The rising sun sent fingers of light through the pale white mists of dawn. A wide plain spread out beneath them, bare and brown, its flatness here and there relieved by long, low hummocks. Ned pointed them out to his king. The barrows of the first men. Robert frowned. Have we ridden into a graveyard? There are barrows everywhere in the north, your grace, Ned told him. This land is old and cold, Robert grumbled, pulling his cloak more tightly around himself. The guard had reined up well behind them, at the bottom of the ridge. Well, well, I did not bring you out here to talk of graves or bicker about your bastard. There was a rider in the night, from Lord Barry's in King's Landing. Here. The king pulled the paper from his belt and handed it to Ned. Varys the Eunuch was King's Master of Whispers. He served Robert now as he had once served Aerys Targaryen. Ned unrolled the paper with trepidation, thinking of Lysa and her terrible accusation, but the message did not concern Lady Arryn. What is what is the source of this information? You remember Sir Jorah Mormont? Would that I might forget him, Ned said bluntly. The Mormonts of Bear Island were an old house, proud and honorable, but their lands were cold and distant and poor. Sir Jorah had tried to swell the family coffers by selling some poachers to a Tyroshi slaver. As the Mormons were bannermen to the Starks, his crime had dishonored the North. Ned had made the long journey west to Bear Island, only to find when he arrived that Jorah had taken ship beyond the reach of ice and the king's justice. 5 years had passed since then. So Jorah is now in Pentos, anxious to earn a royal pardon that would allow him to return from exile, Robert explained. Lord, Var- Lord Varys makes good use of him. So the slaver has become a spy, Ned said with distaste. He handed the letter back. I would rather become a corpse. Varys tells me that spies are more useful than corpses, Robert said. Jorah sighed. What do you make of his report? Daenerys Targaryen was wed to some Dothraki horse lord. What of it? Shall we render shall we send her a wedding gift? The king frowned. A knife, perhaps. A good sharp one, and a bold man to wield it. Ned did not feign surprise. Robert's hatred for the Targaryens was a madness in him. He remembered the angry words they had exchanged when Tywin Lannister had presented Robert with the corpse of Rhaegar's wife and children as a token of fealty. Ned had named that murder. Robert called it war. When he had protested that the young prince and princesses were no more than babes, his new made king had replied, I see no babes, only dragon spawn. Not even Jon Arryn had been able to calm that storm. Eddard Stark had ridden out that very day in a cold rage to fight the last battles of the war alone in the south. It had taken another death to reconcile them, Lyanna's death, and the grief they had shared over her passing. This time, Ned resolved to keep his temper. Your Grace, the, the girl is scarcely more than a child. You are no Tywin Lannister to slaughter innocents. It was said that Rhaegar's little girl had cried. No, it was said that Rhaegar's little girl had cried as they dragged her from beneath her bed to face the swords. The boy had been no more than a babe in arms, yet Lord Tywin's soldiers had torn him from his mother's breast and dashed his head against a wall. How long will this one remain an innocent? Robert's mouth grew hard. This child will soon enough spread her legs and start breeding more dragon spawn to plague me. Nonetheless, Ned said, the mother of children, it would be vile, unspeakable. Unspeakable, the king roared. What Aerys did to your brother Brandon was unspeakable. The way your lord father died, that was unspeakable. And Rhaegar, how many things do you think he raped your sister? Many hundreds of times? His voice had grown so loud that his horse whined nervously beneath him. The king jerked the reins hard, quieting the animal, and pointed an angry finger at Ned. I will kill every Targaryen I can get my hands on until they are as dead as their dragons, and then I will piss on their graves. Ned knew better than to defy him when the wrath was on. Ned knew better than to defy him when the wrath was on him. If the years had not quenched Robert's thirst for revenge, no words of his would help. You can't get your hands on this one, can you? He said quietly. The king's mouth twisted in a bitter grimace. No, gods be cursed. Some pox-ridden Pentoshi cheesemonger had her brother and her walled up on his estate, and pointy-hatted had eunuchs all around them, and now he's handed them over to the Dothraki. I should have had them both killed years ago, when it was more easy to get at them. But John was as bad as you. More full eye. I listened to him. Junarin, Junarin was a wise man and a good hand. Robert snorted. The anger was leaving him as suddenly as it had come. It's called Drogo, he said, to have 100,000 men on his horde. What would Junarin say to that? He would say that even a million Dothraki are no threat to the realm, so long as they remain on the other side of the narrow sea, Ned replied calmly. The barbarians have no ships. They hate and fear the open sea. The king shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. Perhaps. There are ships to be had in the free cities, though. I tell you, Ned, I do not like this marriage. There are there are still those in the Seven Kingdoms who call me usurper. Do you forget how many houses fought for Targaryen in the war? They bide their time for now, but give them half a chance, they will murder me in my bed, and my sons with me. If the beggar king crosses with a Dothraki horde at his back, the traitors will join him. He will not cross, Ned promised. And if by some mischance he does, we will throw him back into the sea. Once you choose a new warden of the East, the king groaned. For the last time, I will not name the Iron Boy warden. I know the boy is your nephew, but with Targaryens climbing in bed with the Thraki, I would I would be mad to rest 1/4 of the realm on the shoulders of a sickly child. And I was ready for that. Yet we must have a warden of the East. If Robert Tyrone will not do, name one of your brothers. Stannis proved himself at the siege of Storm's End, surely. He let the name hang there for a moment. The king frowned and said nothing. He looked uncomfortable. That is, Ned finished quietly, watching, unless you have already promised the honor to another. For a moment, Robert had the grace to look startled. Just as quickly, the look became annoyance. What if I have? It's Jaime Lannister, is it not? Robert kicked his horse back into motion and started down the ridge towards the barrows. Ned kept pace with him. The king rode on, straight ahead. Yes, he said at last, a single hard word to end the matter. Kingslayer, Ned said. The rumors were true then. He rode on dangerous ground now, he knew. An able, a courageous man, no doubt, he said carefully. But his father is Warden of the West, Robert. In time, Sir Jaime will succeed to that honor. No man should hold both East and West. He left and said his real concern, that the appointment would put half the armies of the realm into the hands of Lannisters. I will fight that battle when an enemy appears on the field, the king said stubbornly. At the moment, Lord Tywin looms eternal as Castle Rock, so I doubt that Jaime will be succeeding any time soon. Don't vex me about this, Ned. The stone has been set. Your Grace, may I speak frankly? I seem to be unable to stop you, Robert grumbled. They rode through tall brown grasses. Can you trust Jaime Lannister? He's my wife's twin, a sworn brother of the King's Guard. His life and fortune and honor are all bound to me. As they were bound to Aerys Targaryens, Ned pointed out. Why should I mistrust him? He has done everything I have ever asked of him. His sword helped win the throne I sit on. His sword helped taint the throne you sit on, Ned thought, but he did not permit the words to pass his lips. He swore about to protect his king's life with his own. Then he opened the king's throat with a sword. Then hell, someone had to kill Aerys, Robert said, reining his mount to a sudden halt beside an ancient barrow. If Jaime hadn't done it, it would have been left for you or me. We were not sworn brothers of the King's Guard, Ned said. The time had come for Robert to hear the whole truth. He decided then and there. Do you remember the trident, Your Grace? I won my crown there. How should I forget it? You took a wound from Rhaegar, Ned reminded him. So when the Targaryen host broke and ran, you gave the pursuit into my hands. The remnants of Rhaegar's army fled back to King's Landing. We followed, Ares was in the Red Keep with several thousand loyalists. I expected to find the gates closed to us. Robert gave an impatient shake of his head. Instead, you found that our men had already taken the city. What of it? Not our men. Not our men, Ned said patiently. Lannister men. The lion flew over the ramparts, not the crowned stag, and they had taken the city by treachery. The war had ragged the war had ragged for close to a year. Lords great and small had flocked to Robert's manors. Others had remained loyal to the Targaryen. The mighty Lannisters of Castle Rock, the Wardens of the West, had remained aloof from the struggle, ignoring calls to arms from both rebels and royalists. Aerys Targaryen must have thought that his gods had answered his prayers when Lord Tywin Lannister appeared before the gates of King's Landing with an army 12,000 strong, professing loyalty. So the Mad King had ordered his last mad act. He opened he had opened his city to the lions at the gate. Treachery was a Treachery was a coin the Targaryens knew well, Robert said. The anger was building in him again. Lannister paid them back in kind. It was no less than they deserved. I shall trouble not I shall not trouble my sleep over it. You were not there, Ned said, bitterness in his voice. Trouble's sleep was no stranger to him. He had lived his life for 14 years, yet they still haunted him at night. There was no honor in that conquest. The others take your honor, Robert swore. What did any Targaryen ever know of honor? Go down into your crypt and ask Lyanna about the dragon's honor. You avenged Lyanna the Trident, Ned said, halting beside the king. Promise me, Ned, that she had whispered. That did not bring her back. Robert looked away, off into the great distance. The gods be damned. It was a hollow victory they gave me. A crown. It was the girl I prayed them for. Your sister, safe, and mine again. As she was meant to be. I ask you, Ned, what good is it to wear a crown? The gods mock the prayers of kings and cowherds alike. I cannot answer for the gods, Your Grace, only for what I found when I rode into the throne room that day. Ned said. Harris was dead on the floor, drowned in his own blood. The dragon skulls stared down from the walls. Lannister's men were everywhere. Jaime wore the white cloak of the King's Guard over his golden armor. I can see I can see him still. Even his sword was gilded. He was seated on the iron throne, high above his knights, wearing a helm fashioned in the shape of a lion's head. How he glittered! It is well known, the king complained. I was still mounted. Uh, I rode the length of the hall in silence between the long rows of dragon skulls. It felt as though they were watching me, somehow. I stopped in front of the throne, looked up at him. His golden sword was across his legs, its edge red with the king's blood. My men were filling the room behind me. Lannister's men drew back. I never said a word. I looked at him, seated there on the throne, and I waited. At last, Jaime laughed and got up. He took up his helm and said to me, Have no fear, Stark. I was only keeping it warm for our friend Robert. It is not a very comfortable seat, I'm afraid. The king threw back his head and roared his laughter, startled a flight and roared. His laughter startled a flight of crows from the tall brown grass. They took to the air in a wild beating of wings. You think I should mistrust Lannister because he sat on my throne just for a few moments? He shook with laughter again. Jamie Jamie was all of 17, Ned. Scarce more than a boy. Boy or man, he had no right to the throne. Perhaps he was tired, Robert suggested. Killing kings is weary work. Gods know there's no place else to rest your ass in that damnable room. And he spoke truly. It is a monstrous, uncomfortable chair, in more ways than one. The king shook his head. Well, well, now I know Jamie's dark scene, and the matter can't be forgotten. I'm heartily sick of secrets and squabbles and matters of state, Ned. It's all tedious as counting coppers. Come, let's ride. You used to know how. I want to feel the wind in my hair again. He kicked his horse back into motion and galloped over the barrow, raining earth down below him. For a moment, Ned did not follow. He had run out of words, and he was filled with a vast sense of helplessness. Not for the first time. He wondered what he was doing here and why he had come. He was now John Arryn to curb the wildness of his king and teach him wisdom. Robert would do what he pleased, as he had always done, and nothing Ned could say or do would change that. He belonged in Winterfell. He belonged with Catelyn in her grief, and with Bran. A man could not always be where he belonged, though. Resigned, Eddard Stark put his boots into his horse and set off after the king. Okay, okay, so far, great. Fantastic chapter to start on. You know, we see Ned. Oh, oops. I always accidentally move my pop filter. So yeah, as I was saying before, you know, before I moved the filter. Yeah. I don't know. In this chapter, there's a lot we can see. We can see the relationship between Robert and Ned. Like, yeah, they clearly care about each other. They grew up together. They're brothers, but they're just very different people. You know, Ned is honorable and like a little stuck up, like a little like a, you know, Ned is like that kind of person that kind of has a stick up his ass, while Robert is the total opposite. He's very wild. He's very free. I like that whenever you can tell that he's very loud. They constantly described what he does as roaring, and either whether he's laughing or yelling, you know, or just talking. Sometimes he roars, you know. And that's pretty interesting. I also think it might be kind of I don't know, maybe I don't think it's supposed to denote Lannister influence. Perhaps the Lannisters, you know, their sigil is a lion, and it's a golden lion, and their words are "Hear me roar." So that could be it, but I don't think that's it. You know, if anything, I feel like it's. I mean, yeah, they clearly influence him quite a bit, as we see in this chapter. Ned, who distrusts the Lannisters, especially because he knows that like they might have murdered Jon Arryn. But Robert, who doesn't know that, he's like, yeah, I mean, they're just Lannisters, you know. I have no reason quite to mistrust them. Robert just doesn't care, and like if he wanted, he could probably find, you know, that there are quite a few reasons to mistrust them, but you know, he's not interested. He just won't. You know, he's just not someone who's trying to you know, pay attention. He doesn't care about the matters of the court or all of that. To him, those things are tedious and just boring. That's partially why he asked Ned to become Hand of the King, so that, you know, someone else can deal with all that for him, because he doesn't want to. So, you know, I think it's pretty cool. What we see here, we have this difference. We can tell that these characters are very different, and they probably have grown quite apart. We can see that there might be some conflict there because they just don't see eye to eye on things. And yeah, uh, that's kind of how it goes. But anyways, let's continue. Let's go next chapter. Tyrion Lannister. This is my favorite character by far. You know, so let's just go for it. The North went on forever. Tyrion Lannister knew the maps as well as anyone. But a fortnight on the wild track that passed for the King's Road up here had brought home the lesson that the map was one thing and the land quite another. They had left Winterfell on the same day as the king. Amidst all the commotion of the royal departure, riding out to the sound of men shouting and horses snorting, to the rattle of wagons and the groaning of the queen's huge wheelhouse. As a light snow flurried about them, the King's Road was just beyond the sprawl of castle and town. There, the banners and wagons and the columns of knights and free riders turned south, taking the tumult with them, while Tyrion turned north with Benjen Stark and his nephew. It had grown colder after that, and far more quiet. West of the road were flint hills, grey and rugged, with tall watchtowers on their stony summits. To the east, the land was lower, the ground flattening to a rolling plain that stretched away as far as the eye could see. Stone bridges spanned swift, narrow rivers, while small farms spread in rings around holdfasts, walled in wood and stone. The road was well trafficked, and at night, for their comfort, there were rude inns to be found. 3 days' ride from Winterfell, however, the farmland gave way to dense wood, and the King's Road grew lonely. The flint hills rose higher and wilder with each passing mile, until by the fifth day they had turned into mountains, cold blue gray giants with jagged promontories and snow on their shoulders. When the wind blew from the north, long plumes of ice crystals flew from the high peaks like banners. With the mountains a wall to the west, the road veered north by northeast through the wood, a forest of oak and evergreen and black briar that seemed older and darker than any Tyrion had ever seen. The Wolf's Wood, Benjamin Stark called it, and indeed, their nights came alive with the howls of distant packs, and some not so distant. Jon Snow's albino direwolf pricked up his ears at the nightly howling, but never raised his own voice in reply. There was something very unsettling about that animal, Tyrion thought. There were 8 in the party by then, not counting the wolf. Tyrion traveled with 2 of his own men, as befit a Lannister. Benjen Stark had only his bastard nephew and some fresh mounts for the night's watch. But at the edge of the Gulfswood, they stayed a night behind the wooden walls of a forest holdfast, and there joined up with another of the Black brothers, one Joran. Joran was stooped and sinister, his features hidden behind a beard as black as his clothing, but he seemed as though as an old rude and hard as stone. With him were a pair of ragged peasant boys from the fingers, Rap- rapers, Joran said with a cold look at his charges. Tyrion understood. Life on the wall was said to be hard, but no doubt it was preferable to castration. 5 men, 3 boys, and the direwolf. 20 horses and a cage of ravens given over to Benjen Stark by Maester Luwin. No doubt they made a curious fellowship for the King's Road, or any road. Tyrion noticed Jon Snow watching Joran and his sullen companions with an odd cast to his face that looked uncomfortably like dismay. Joran had a twisted shoulder and a sour smell. His hair and beard were matted and greasy and full of lice. His clothing old, patched, and seldom washed. His 2 young recruits smelled even worse, and seemed as stupid as they were cruel. No doubt the boy had made the mistake of thinking that the Night's Watch was made of men like his uncle. Joran and his companions were a rude awakening. Tyrion felt sorry for the boy. He had chosen a hard life. Or perhaps he should say that a hard life had been chosen for him. He had rather less sympathy for that uncle. Benjen Stark seemed to share his brother's distaste for Lannisters, and he had not been pleased when Tyrion had told him of his intentions. I warn you, Lannister, you'll find no inns at the wall, he had said, looking down on him. No doubt you'll find some place to put me, Tyrion had replied. As you might have noticed, I'm small. One did not say no to the Queen's brother, of course, so that had settled the matter. But Stark had not been happy. You will not like the ride, I promise you that, he said curtly. and since the moment they set out, he had done all he could to live up to that promise. By the end of the first week, Tyrion's thighs were raw from hard riding, his legs were cramping badly, and he was chilled to the bone. But he did not complain. He was damned if he would give Benjen Stark that satisfaction. He took a small revenge in the matter of his riding fur, a tattered bear skin, and old and musty smelling. Stark had offered it to him in an excess of Night's Watch gallantry, no doubt expecting him to graciously decline. Tyrion had accepted with a smile. He had brought his warmest clothing with him when they rode out of Winterfell, and soon discovered that it was nowhere near warm enough. It was cold up here, and growing colder. The nights were well below freezing now, and when the wind blew, it was like a knife cutting right through his warmest woolens. By now, Stark was no doubt regretting his chivalrous impulse. Perhaps he had learned the lesson. The Lannisters never declined, graciously or otherwise. The Lannisters took what was offered. Farms and holdfasts grew scarier and smaller as they passed northward, ever deeper into the darkness of the Wolf's Wood, until finally there were no more roofs to shelter under, and they were thrown back on their own resources. Tyrion was never much Tyrion was never much use in making a camp or breaking one. Too small, too hobbled, too in the way. So while Stark and Joran and the other men erected rude shelters, tended the horses, and built a fire, it became his custom to take his fur and wineskin and go off by himself to read. On the 18th night of their journey, the wine was a rare sweet amber from the Summer Isles that he had brought all the way north from Castle Rock, and the book a rumination on the history and properties of dragons. With Lord Eddard's permission, Tyrion had borrowed a few rare volumes from the Winterfell library and packed them for the ride north. He found a comfortable spot just beyond the noise of the camp, beside a swift running stream with waters clear and cold as ice. A grotesquely ancient oak provided shelter uh, from the biting wind. Tyrion curled up in his fur with his back against the trunk, took a sip of wine, and began to read about the properties of Dragonbone. Dragonbone is black because of its high iron content, the book told him. It is as strong as steel, yet lighter and far more flexible, and of course, utterly impervious to fire. Dragonbone bows are greatly prized by the Dothraki, and the small wonder, an archer so armed can outrange any wooden bow. Tyrion had Tyrion had a morbid fascination with dragons. When he had first come to King's Landing for his sister's wedding to Robert Baratheon, he had made it a point to seek out the dragon skulls that had hung on the walls of Targaryen's throne room. King Robert had replaced them with banners and tapestries, but Tyrion had persisted until he found the skulls in the dank cellar where they had been stored. He had expected to find them impressive, perhaps even frightening. He had not thought to find them beautiful, yet there they were, as black as onyx, polished smooth, so the points seemed to shimmer in the light of his torch. They, they liked the fire, he sensed. He thrust the torch into the mouth of one of the larger skulls and made the shadows leap and dance on the wall behind him. The teeth were long, curving knives of black diamond. The flame of the torch was nothing to them. They had bathed in the heat of far greater fires when he had moved away. Tyrion had Tyrion could have sworn that the beast's empty eye sockets had watched him go. There were 19 skulls. The oldest was more than 3,000 years old, the youngest a mere century and a half. The most recent were also the smallest, a matched pair no bigger than a mastiff's skull, and oddly misshapen, all that remained of the last two hatchlings born on Dragonstone. They were the last of the Targaryen dragons, perhaps the last dragons anywhere, and they had not lived very long. From there, the skulls ranged upward in size to the 30 great monsters of song and story, the dragons that Aegon Targaryen and his sisters had unleashed on the seven kingdoms of old. The singers had given them names of gods: Balerion, Meraxes, and Vagar. Tyrion had stood between their gaping jaws, wordless and awed. You could have ridden a horse down Baker's gullet, although you would not have ridden it out again. Meraxes was even bigger, and the greatest of them, Balerion, the Black Dread, could have swallowed an aurochs whole. Could have swallowed, yeah, an aurochs whole, or even one of the hairy mammoths said to roam the cold wastes beyond the port of Even. Tyrion stood in that dank cellar for a long time, staring at Balerion's huge, empty eyed skull until his torch burned low, trying to grasp the size of the living animal, to imagine how it must have looked when it spread its great black wings and swept across the skies, breathing fire. His own remote ancestor, King Loring of the Rock, had tried to stand against the fire when he joined with King Mern of the Reach to oppose the Targaryen conquest. That was close on the 300 that was close on 300 years ago, when the seven kingdoms were kingdoms and not mere provinces of a greater realm. Between them, the two kings had 600 banners flying, 5,000 mounted knights, and 10 times as many free riders and men at arms. Aegon Dragonlord had perhaps a fifth that number. The chronicles said the chronicles said, and most of those were conscripts from under the ranks of the last king he had slain. Their loyalties uncertain. The hosts met on the broad plains of the Reach, amidst golden fields of wheat ripe for harvest. When the two kings charged, the Targaryen army shivered and shattered and began to run. For a few moments, the chronicles wrote the conquest was at an end, but only for those few moments before Aegon Targaryen and his sisters joined the battle. It was the only tar it was the only time that Vagar, Meraxes, and Balerion were all unleashed at once. The singers called it the Field of Fire. Near 4,000 men had burned that day, among them King Mern of the Reach. King Loren had escaped and lived long enough to surrender, pledge his fealty to the Targaryens, and beget a son, for which Tyrion was duly grateful. Why do you read so much? Tyrion looked up at the sound of the voice. Jon Snow was standing a few feet away, regarding him curiously. He closed the book on a finger and said, "Look at me and tell me what you see." The boy looked at him suspiciously. "Is this some kind of trick? I see you, Tyrion Lannister." Tyrion sighed. "You are remarkably polite for a bastard, Snow. What you see is a dwarf. You are, what, 12? 14, the boy said. 14. And you're taller than I will ever be. My legs are short and twisted, and I walk with difficulty. I require a special saddle to keep from falling off my horse, a saddle of my own design. You may be interested to know. It was either that or ride a pony. My arms are strong enough, but again, too short. I will never make a swordsman. Had I been born a peasant, they might have left me out to die, or sold me to some slaver's grotesquerie. Alas, I was born a Lannister of Castle Rock, and the grotesqueries are all the poorer. Things are expected of me. My father was the hand of the king for 20 years. My brother later killed that very same king, as it turns out, but life is full of these little ironies. My sister married the new king, and my repulsive nephew will be king after him. I must do my part for the honor of my house, wouldn't you agree? Yet how? Well, my legs may be too small for my body, but my head is too large, although I prefer to think it is just large enough for my mind. I have a realistic grasp on my own strengths and weaknesses. My mind is my weapon. My brother has his sword. King Robert has his warhammer, and I have my mind. And the mind needs books, as a sword needs a whetstone, if it is to keep its edge. Tyrion tapped the leather cover of the book. That is why I read. That is why I read so much, Jon Snow. The boy absorbed that all in silence. He had the stark face, if not the name, long, solemn, guarded, a face that gave nothing away. Whoever his mother had been, she had left little of herself in her son. "What are you reading about?" he asked. "Dragons," Tyrion told him. "What good is that?" "There are no more dragons," the boy said with the easy certainty of youth. "So they say," Tyrion replied. "Sad, isn't it? When I was your age, I used to dream of having a dragon of my own." "You did?" the boy said suspiciously. Perhaps he thought Tyrion was making fun of him. "Oh, yes. If even a stunted, twisted, ugly little boy can look down over the world when he's sitting on a dragon's back." Tyrion pushed up the bearskin aside and climbed to his feet. "I used to start fires in the bowels of Castle Rock and stare at the flames for hours, pretending they were dragon fire. Sometimes I'd imagine my father burning, and other times my sister. Jon Snow was staring at him, a look equal parts horror and fascination. Tyrion coughed. "Don't look at me that way, bastard. I know your secret. You've dreamed of the same kind of dreams." "No," Jon said, horrified. "I wouldn't." "No? Never?" Tyrion raised an eyebrow. "Well, no doubt the Starks have been terribly good to you. I'm certain Lady Stark treats you as if you were one of her own. And your brother Robb, he's always been kind, and why not? He gets Winterfell, and you get the Wall. And your father, he must have had a good reason for packing you off to the Night's Watch." Stop it," Jon Snow said, his face dark with anger. "The Night's Watch is a noble calling." Tyrion laughed. "You're too smart to believe that. The Night's Watch is a meeting heap of all the misfits of the realm. I've seen you looking at Jorin and his boys. Those are your new brothers, Jon Snow. How do you like them? Sullen peasants, debtors, poachers, rapers, thieves, and bastards like you all wind up on the wall, watching for grumpkins and snarks and all the other monsters your wet nurse warned you about. The good part is there are no grumpkins or snarks, so it's scarcely dangerous work. The bad part is you freeze your balls off. But since you're not allowed to breed anyway, I don't suppose that matters." "Stop it!" the boy screamed. He took a step forward, his hands coiling into fists, close to tears. Suddenly, absurdly, Tyrion felt guilty. He took a step forward, intending to give the boy a reassuring pat on the shoulder or mutter some word of apology. He never saw the wolf, where it was, or how it came at him. One moment he was walking towards snow, and the next he was flat on his back on the hard, rocky ground, the book spinning away from him as he felt, the breath going out of him at the sudden impact, his mouth full of dirt and blood and rotting leaves. As he tried to get up, his back spasmed painfully. He must have wrenched it in the fall. He ground his teeth in frustration, grabbed a root, and pulled himself back to a sitting position. "Help me," he said to the boy, reaching up a hand, and suddenly the wolf was beside him. He did not growl. The damn thing never made a sound. He only looked at him with those bright red eyes and showed him his teeth, and that was more than enough. Tyrion sagged back to the ground with grunt. "Don't help me then. I'll sit right here until you leave." Jon Snow stroked the ghost's thick white fur, smiling. "Now, ask me nicely." Tyrion Lannister felt the anger coiling inside him and crushed it out with a will. It was not the first time in his life he had been humiliated, and it would not be the last. Perhaps he even deserved this. "Should be very grateful for your kind assistance, Jon," he said mildly. "Down, Ghost," the boy said. The direwolf sat on his haunches. Those red eyes never left Tyrion. Jon came around beside him, slid his hand under his arms, and lifted him easily to his feet. Then he picked up the book and handed it back. Why did he attack me?" Tyrion asked with a silent glance at the direwolf. He wiped the blood and dirt from his mouth with the back of his hand. "Maybe he thought you were a grumpkin." Tyrion glanced at him sharply. Then he laughed, a raw snort of amusement that came bursting out through his nose entirely without permission. "Oh, gods," he said, choking on his laughter and shaking his head. I suppose I do rather look like a grumpkin." What does he do to Snarks? You don't want to know. John picked up the wineskin and handed it to Tyrion. Tyrion pulled out the stopper, tilted his head, and squeezed a long stream into his mouth. The wine was cool. Was cool fire as it trickled down his throat and warmed his belly. He held out the skin to Jon Snow. Want some? The boy took the skin and tried a cautious swallow. It's true, isn't it? He said when he was done. What you said about the Night's Watch. Tyrion nodded. Jon Snow set his mouth in a grim line. If that's what it is, that's what it is. Tyrion grinned at him. That's good, bastard. Most men would rather deny a hard truth than face it. Most men, the boy said. But no, not you. No, Tyrion admitted. Not me. Seldom ever dream of dragons anymore. There are no dragons. He scooped up a fallen bearskin. Come, you had better return to the camp before your uncle calls the banners. The walk was short, but the ground was rough underfoot, and his legs were cramping badly by the time they got back. Jon Snow offered a hand to help him over a thick tangle of roots, but Tyrion shook him off. He would make his own way, as he had all his life. Still, the camp was a welcome sight. The shelters had been thrown up down against the tumble down wall of a long abandoned holdfast, and a shield against the wind. The horses had been fed and fire had been laid. Yoren sat on a stone, skinning a squirrel. The savory smell of stew filled Tyrion's nostrils. He dragged himself over to where his man Morek was tending the stew pot. Wordlessly, Morek the handed him the ladle. Tyrion tasted and handed it back. More pepper, he said. Benjen Stark emerged from the shelter he shared with his nephew. There you are, John. Damn it. Don't go off like that by yourself. I thought the others had gotten you. It was the Grumpkins, Tyrion told him, laughing. Jon Snow smiled. Stark shot a baffled look at Joran. The old man grunted, shrugged, and went back to his bloody work. The squirrel gave some body to the stew, and they ate it with black bread and hard cheese that night around their fire. Tyrion shared around his skin of wine until even Yoren grew mellow. One by one, the company drifted off to their shelters and to sleep, all but Jon Snow, who had done the night's first watch. Tyrion was the last to retire. As always, he stepped into the shelter his men had built for him. He paused and looked back at Jon Snow. The boy stood near the fire, his face still and hard, looking deep into the flames. Tyrion Lannister smiled sadly and went to bed. Okay, so another chapter. Yeah, so far pretty good. I'm really liking it. You know, I don't know. I really appreciate Tyrion and Jon's relationship that we see. Like as Tyrion has said, he has, you know, he understands Jones. They're both outcasts, misfits. Makes sense that he would to some extent relate to him and be kinder to him that he might otherwise be to others, like his nephew. That's something I like about Tyrion Lannister. He's willing to slap, people he considers assholes. And sometimes not even assholes. He's willing to be kind of mean and outright sometimes cruel to people just because. But he's always really nice, especially to people who he sees as like, I don't know, as underdogs, sort of. I also like how mature John is. As I've said, he's still kind of a child, but he's quick to wake up. He's, as Tyrion said, quick to face the truth. He realizes that's what the watch is, and he still is like, well, that is what it is, And I like that. I like how John is. I like many of the things that we see here. I like how, for example, all we see that with Ghost, with the walls, I think, are supposed to be reflections of their owner. So I like how, for example, how Ghost is quiet, but he bares his fangs. There's something weird. There's something outside. Like John has all this inside him. Like John is probably something that has this that hasn't come out. That this fierceness to him. Uh, but he's quiet. He just looks and kind of learns and that and yeah, I like that Tyrion for one respects him. He's still kind of an ass, as we see. He almost makes Jon cry, but still, at the end of the day, they end up laughing about it. And and usually when people insult Tyrion about his height or anything, most most of the times Tyrion gets angry. He wants to get back at the people who humiliate him. Like he's like, yes, it is me, the dwarf, who's doing this. He feels like his pride is wounded, but not with Jon Snow. This one time he was like, maybe this one time I even earned it. So and not only that, but he even finds it amusing. He even laughs a bit at the remarks, at the comebacks that Jon comes up with. So yeah, I like that. I mean, that's who Tyrion Lannister is, and I really enjoy that. Um, I really enjoy watching all this. I really like how you know yeah, how he takes one of the Night Watch codes, even though others believe like he wouldn't, like Benjen believes he wouldn't. Yeah, I also like that. I also like the prejudice. Like Tyrion has to face prejudice in all ways because he's short, or because he's like deformed a little bit, or even now, like it doesn't say that Benjen hates him for being a dwarf. I doubt that Benjen would do that because again, the Night's Watch is full of misfits. If instead, I feel like Benjen hates him because he's a Lannister. So even the one thing that protects him, that shields him, you know, um, kind of a little bit, that also is a sort of prejudice to him. And I like that. I like, how interesting it is, like how we can see that there's very complex relationships here between the Lannisters and the Starks. They really just don't get along. Um, yeah, I really enjoy reading up on all of these things. So that's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. I like it. I like it. Let's continue. Let's continue with the next chapter. The next is Catelyn. Huh. Okay. And ooh, after Catelyn, I believe is the first Sansa chapter. I'm excited for that. I really like Sansa chapters, even though at least at first I really do not like Sansa as a character. uh, anyways, let's get going. Catelyn. Ned and the girls were 8 days gone when Master Lewin came to her one night in Bran's sick room, carrying a reading lamp and the books of account. It is past time we reviewed the figures, my lady, he said. You want to know how much this royal visit cost us? Catelyn looked at Bran in his sick bed and brushed his hair off his forehead. It had grown very long, she realized. She would have to cut it soon. I have no need to look at figures, Maester Lewin, she told him, never taking her eyes from Brown. I know what the visit cost us. Take the books away. My lady, the king's party had healthy appetites. We must replenish of stores before she cut him off. I said, take the books away. The steward will attend to our needs. We have no steward, Maester Lewin reminded her. Like a little grey rat, she thought. He would not let go. Poole went south to establish Lord Eddard's household at King's Landing. Catelyn nodded absently. Oh yes, I remember. Bran looked so pale she wondered whether they might move his bed under the window so he could get the morning sun. Maester Lewin set the lamp in a niche by the door and fiddled with its wick. There are several appointments that require your immediate attention, my lady. Besides the steward, we need a captain of the guards to fill Jory's place, a new master of horse. Her eyes snapped around and found him. A master of horse? Her voice was a whip. The maester was shaken. Yes, my lady. Cullen rode sad with Lord Eddard, so my son lies here broken and dire, Lewin, and you wish to discuss a new master of horse. Do you think I care what happens in the stables? Do you think it matters to me one whit? I would gladly butcher every horse in Winterfell with my own hands if it would open Bran's eyes. Do you understand that? Do you? He bowed his head. Yes, my lady, but the appointments. I'll make the appointments. I'll make the appointments, Rob said. Catelyn had not heard him enter, but there he stood in the doorway looking at her. She had been shouting, she realized, with a sudden flush of shame. What was happening to her? She was so tired, and her head hurt all the time. Mr. Lewin looked from Catelyn to her son. I have prepared a list of those we might wish to consider for the vacant office, he said, offering Rob a paper plucked from his sleeve. Her son glanced at the names. He had come from outside. Catelyn saw. His cheeks were red from the cold, his hair shaggy and windblown. Good men, he said. We'll talk about them tomorrow. He handed back the list of names. Very good, my lord. The paper vanished into his sleeve. Leave us now, Robert said. Master Lewin bowed and departed. Robert closed the door behind him and turned to her. He was wearing a sword, she saw. Mother, what are you doing? Catelyn had always thought Robert looked like her, like Bran and Rickon and Sansa. He had the tully coloring, the auburn hair, the blue eyes, yet now, for the first time, she saw something of Eddard Stark in his face. Okay. Uh, Something as stern, as hard as the North. What am I doing? She echoed, puzzled. How can you ask that? What do you imagine I'm doing? I'm taking care of your brother. I'm taking care of Bran. Is that what you call it? You haven't left this room since Bran was hurt. You didn't even come to the gate when father and the girls went south. I said my farewells to them here and watched them ride out from the window. She had begged Ned not to go. Not now. Not after what happened. Everything had changed now. Couldn't he see that? It was no use. He had no choice. He had told her. And then he left, choosing. I can't leave him, even for a moment. Not when any moment could be his last. I have to be with him if. She took her son's limp hand, sliding his fingers through her own. He was so frail and thin, with no strength left on his hand, but he could still feel the warmth of life through his skin. Rob's voice softened. He's not going to die, mother. Master Lewin says the time of greatest danger has passed. And what if Maester Lewin is wrong? What if Brown needs me and I'm not here? Rickon needs you, Rob said sharply. He's only 3. He doesn't understand what's happening. He thinks everyone has deserted him, so he follows me around all day, clutching my leg and crying. I don't know what to do with him. He paused a moment, chewing on his lower lip the way he'd done when he was little. Mother, I need you too. I'm trying, but I can't. I can't do it all by myself. His voice broke down with sudden emotion, and Catelyn remembered that he was only 14. She wanted to go up and go to him, but Bran was still holding her hand, and she could not move. Outside the tower, a wolf began to howl. Catelyn trembled for a second. Bran's robe opened the window and let the night air into the stuffy tower room. The howling grew louder. It was a cold and lonely sound, full of melancholy and despair. Don't, she told him. Brad needs to stay warm. He needs to hear them sing, Rob said. Somewhere out in Winterfell, a second wolf began to howl in a chorus with the first. Then a third, closer. Shaggydoy and Grey Wind, Rob said as their voices rose and fell together. You can tell them apart if you listen close. Catelyn was shaking. It was the grief, the cold, the howling of dire wolves. Night after night, the howling and the cold wind and the grey empty castle. On and on they went, never changing, and her body lying there broken. The sweetest of her children, the gentlest, Bran who loved to laugh and climb, and dreamt of knighthood, all gone now. She would never hear him laugh again. Sobbing, she pulled her hand free of his and covered her ears against the terrible howls. Make them stop, she cried. I can't stand it. I can't Make them stop. Make them stop. Kill them all if you must. Just make them stop. She didn't remember falling into the floor, but there she was, and Rob was lifting her, holding her in strong arms. Don't be afraid, mother. They would never hurt him. He helped her to her narrow bed in the corner of the sick room. Close your eyes, he said gently. Rest. Mr. Lewin tells me you've hardly slept since Fran's fall. I can't, she wept. God forgive me, Ron. I can't. What if he dies while I'm asleep? What if he dies? What if he dies? The wolves were still howling. She screamed and held her ears again. Oh, gods, close the window. If you swear, if you swear to me that you'll sleep. Rob went to the window, but as he reached for the shutters, another sound was added to the mournful howling of the dire wolves. Dogs, he listened. He said, listening. All the dogs are barking. They've never done that before. Caroline heard his breath catch his throat. When she looked up, his face was in a pale lamplight. Fire, he whispered. Fire, she thought, and then, Bran, help me, she said, urgently sitting up. Help me with Bran. Rob did not seem to hear her. The library tower's on fire, he said. Cataline could see the flickering reddish lights through the open window. Now she sighed with relief. Bran was safe. The library was across the bailey. There was no way the fire would reach them here. Thank the gods, she whispered. Rob looked at her as if she'd gone mad. Mother, stay here. I'll come back as soon as the fire's out. He ran then. She heard him shout to the guards outside the room, heard them descending together in a wild rush, taking the stairs 2 and 3 at a time. Outside, there were shouts of fire in the yard, screams, running footsteps, the whining of frightened horses, and the frantic barking of castle dogs. I'm sorry. The howling was gone, she realized, as she listened to the cacophony. The dire wolves had fallen silent. Caroline said a silent prayer of thanks to the 7 faces of God as she went to the window. Across the bailey, long tongues of flame shot from the windows of the library. She watched the smoke rise into the sky and thought sadly of all the books the Starks had gathered over the centuries. Then she closed the shutters. When she turned away from the window, the man was in the room with her. You aren't you weren't supposed to be here, he muttered sourly. No one's supposed to be here. He was small. He's a small, dirty man in filthy brown clothing, and he stank of horses. Callan knew all the men who worked in the stables, and he was none of them. He was gaunt, with limp blond hair and pale eyes, deep sunk in a bony face, and there was a dagger in his hand. Catalin looked at the knife, then at Bran. No, she said. The word stuck in her throat, the merest whisper. The merest whisper. He must have heard her. It's a mercy, he said. He's dead already. No, Catalin said louder, now as she found her voice again. No, you can't. She spun back towards the window to scream for help, but the man moved faster than she would have believed. On one hand, clamped down over her mouth and yanked back her head. The other was brought. The other brought the dagger up to her windpipe. The stench of him was overwhelming. She reached up with both hands and grabbed the blade with all her strength, pulling it away from her throat. She heard him cursing into her ears. Her fingers were slippery with blood, but she would not let go of the dagger. The hand over her mouth clenched more tightly, shutting off her air. Kathleen twisted her hair to the side and managed to get a piece of flesh between her teeth. She bit down hard into his palm. The man grunted in pain. She ground her teeth together and tore at him, and all of a sudden he let go. The taste of his blood filled her mouth. She sucked in the air and screamed, and he grabbed her hair and pulled her away from him, and she stumbled and went down. And then he was standing over her, breathing hard, shaking. The dagger was still clutched tightly in his right hand, slick with blood. You ain't supposed to be here, he repeated stupidly. Kathleen saw the shadow slip through the open door behind her. There was a low rumble, less than a snarl, the merest whisper of a threat, but he must have heard something, because he started to turn just as the wolf made its leap. They went down together, Half sprawled over Catelyn where she'd fallen. The wolf had him under the jaw. Uh, okay, aha. Uh, the wolf uh, had him under the jaw. The man's shriek lasted less than a second before the beast wrenched back its head, taking out half his throat. His blood felt like warm rain as it sprayed across her face. The wolf was looking at her. Its jaws were red and wet, and its eyes glowed golden in the dark room. It was Bran's wolf, she realized. Of course it was. Thank you, Caroline whispered, her voice faint and dainty. She lifted her hand, trembling. The wolf padded closer, sniffed at her fingers, then licked at the blood with a wet, rough tongue. When it had when it had cleaned all the blood of her hand, it turned away silently and jumped on Bran's bed and lay down beside him. Caroline began to laugh hysterically. That was the way they found them. When Rob had Master Lewin and Sir Roderick burst in with half the guards in Winterfell, when the laughter finally died in her throat, they wrapped her in warm blankets and led her back to the Great Keep, to her own chambers. Old Nan undressed her and helped her into a scalding hot bath and washed the blood off her with a soft cloth. Afterward, Maester Lewin arrived to dress her wounds. The cuts in her fingers went deep, almost to the bone, and her scalp was raw and bleeding, where he'd pulled out a handful of hair. The Maester told her the pain was just starting now, and gave her milk of the puppy to help her sleep. Finally, she closed her eyes. When she opened them again, they told her that she had slept 4 days. Caroline nodded and up in the bed. It all seemed like a light nightmare to her now. Everything since Bran's fall, a terrible dream of blood and grief, but she had the pain in her hands to remind her that it was real. She felt weak and light-headed, yet strangely resolute, as if a great weight had lifted from her. Bring me some bread and honey, she told the servants, and take word to Maester Lewin that my bandages want changing. They looked at her in surprise and ran to do her bidding. Caroline remembered the way she had been before, and she was ashamed. She had let them all down, her children, her husband, her house. It would not happen again. She would show these northerners how strong a Tully of Riverrun could be. Rob arrived before her food. Roderick Castle came with him, and her husband's ward, Theon Greyjoy, and lastly Hallis Mullen, a muscular guardsman with a square brown beard. He was the new captain of the guard, Rob said. Her son was dressed in boiled leather and ringmail, she saw, and a sword hung in his waist. Who was he? Cattle asked him. No one knows his name, Hallis Mullen told her. He was no man of Winterfell, my lady, but some says they seen him here at about the castle these past few weeks. One of the king's men, then, she said, or one of the Lannisters. He could have waited behind when the others left. Maybe, Hal said. With all these strangers filling up Winterfell of late, there's no way of saying who he belonged to. He'd been hiding in your stables, Greyjoy said. Ah, you could smell it on him. And how could he go unnoticed? She said sharply. Hallis Mullen looked abashed. Between the horses Lord Eddard took south, and on them we sent north to the Night's Watch, the stalls were half empty. It were no great trick to hide from the stable boys. Could be Hodor saw him. The talk is that the boy's been acting queer, but simple as he is. Hall shook his head. We found where he'd been sleeping, Rob put in. He had 90 silver stacks in a leather bag buried beneath the straw. It's good to son It's good to know my son's life was not sold cheaply, Catelyn said bitterly. Hallis Mullen looked at her, confused. Begging your grace, my lady, you saying he was out to kill your boy? Greyjoy was doubtful. That's madness. He came for Bran, Catelyn said. He kept muttering how I wasn't supposed to be there. He set the library fire thinking I would rush to put it out, taking any guards with me. If I hadn't been half mad with grief, it would have worked. Why would anyone want to kill Why would anyone want to kill Bran? Rob said. Gods, he's only a little boy, helpless, sleeping. Catelyn gave her firstborn a challenging look. If you are to rule the North, you must think these things through, Rob. Answer your own question. Why would anyone want to kill a sleeping child? Before he could answer, the servants returned with a plate of food fresh from the kitchen. There was much more than she'd asked for: hot bread, butter and honey, and blackberry preserves, a rasher of bacon and soft boiled egg, a wedge of cheese, a pot of mint tea, and with it came Master Lewin. How is my son, Maester? Caroline looked at all the food and found she had no appetite. Maester Lewin lowered his eyes. Unchanged, my lady. It was the reply she had expected, no more and no less. Her hands throbbed with pain, as if the blade were still in her, cutting deep. She went she sent the servants away and looked back to Rob. Do you have the answer yet? Someone is afraid Bran might wake up, Rob said. Um, Afraid of what he knows, what he might say or do. Afraid of something he knows. Catelyn was proud of him. Very good. She turned to the new captain of guard. We must keep Bran safe. If there was one killer, there could be others. How many guards do you want, my lady? Hal asked. So long as Eddard is away, my son is the master of Winterfell, she told him. Rob stood a little taller. Put one man in the sick room night and day, one outside the door, two at the bottom of the stairs. No one sees Brown without my warrant or my mother's. As you say, my lord. Do it now, Catelyn suggested, and let his wolf stay in the room with him. Rob added, yes, Catelyn said, and then again, yes. Halin Mullen bowed and left the room. Lady Stark, Sir Roderick said when the guardsman had gone, did you chance to notice the dagger the killer used? That circumstances did not allow me to examine it closely, but I can vouch for its edge, Catelyn replied with a dry smile. Why, you ask? We found the knife still in the villain's grasp. It seemed to me that it was altogether too fine a weapon for such a man, so I looked at it long and hard. The blade is Valyrian steel, the hilt dragonbone. A weapon like that has no business being in the hands of such as him. Someone gave it to him. Catelyn nodded thoughtful. Catelyn nodded thoughtful. Rob, close the door. He looked at her strangely, but she did as she told him. As she told him. What I'm about to tell you must not leave this room, she told them. I want your oaths on that. Even if part of what I suspect is true, Ned and my girls have ridden into deadly danger, and a word in the wrong ears could mean their lives. Lord Eddard is a second father to me, said Theon Greyjoy. I do so swear. You have my oath, Maester Lewin said. And mine, my lady, echoed Sir Roderick, and she looked at her son. And you, Rob? He nodded his consent. My sister Lysa believes the Lannisters murdered her husband, Lord Arryn, the Hand of the King, Catelyn told them. It comes to me that Jaime Lannister did not join the hunt the day Bran fell. He remained here in the castle. The room was deathly quiet. I do not think Bran fell from that tower, she said into the stillness. I think he was thrown. The shock was plain on their faces. My lady, that is a monstrous suggestion, said Roderick Castle. Even the Kingslayer would flinch at the murder of an innocent child. Oh, would he? Theon Greyjoy asked. I wonder. There is no limit to Lannister pride or Lannister ambition, Catelyn said. The boy had always the boy had always been sure-handed in the past, Maester Lewin said thoughtfully. He knew every stone in Winterfell. Gods, Robert swore, his young face dark with anger. If this is true, he will pay for it. He drew his sword and waved it into the air. I'll kill him myself. Sir Roderick bristled at him. Put that away. The Lannisters are hundreds leagues away. Never draw your sword unless you mean to use it. How many times must I tell you, foolish boy? Foolish boy. Abashed, Rob sheathed his sword. Suddenly, a child again. Catelyn said to Sir Roderick, I see my son is wearing steel now. The old master at arms served. I thought it was time. Was looking at her anxiously. Past time, she said. Winterfell may have need of all its swords soon, and they had best not be made of wood. Theon Greyjoy put a hand on the hilt of his blade and said, My lady, if it comes to that, my house owes yours a great debt. Maester Lewin pulled at his chain collar, where it chafed against his neck. All we have is conjecture. This is the queen's beloved brother we mean to accuse. She will not take it kindly. We must have proof, or forever keep silent. Your proof is in the dagger, Sir Roderick said. A fine blade like that will not have gone unnoticed. There was only one place to find the truth of it, Catelyn realized. Someone must go to King's Landing. I'll go, Rob said. No, she told him. Your place is here. There must always be a Stark in Winterfell. She looked at Sir Roderick with his great white whiskers, at Maester Luwin in his grey robes, at young Greyjoy, lean and dark and impetuous. Who to send? Who would be believed? Then she knew. Catelyn struggled to push back the blankets, her bandaged fingers as stiff and unyielding as stone. She climbed out of the bed. I must go myself. My lady, said Maester Luwin, is that wise? Surely the Lannister would greet your arrival with suspicion. What about Bran? Rob asked. The poor boy looked utterly confused now. You can't mean to leave him. I have done everything I can for Bran, she said, laying a wounded hand on his arm. His life is in the hand of the gods, and Maester Luwin, as you reminded me yourself, Rob, I have other children to think of now. You will need a strong escort, my lady, Theon said. I'll send Hal with a squad of guardsmen, Rob said. No, a large party attracts unwelcome attention. I would not have the Lannisters know I'm coming. Sir Roderick protested. My lady, let me accompany you at least. The King's Road can be perilous for a woman alone. I will not be taking the King's Road, Catelyn replied. She thought for a moment, then nodded her consent. Two riders can move fast as one, and a good deal faster than a long column burdened by wagons and wheelhouses. I will welcome your company, Sir Roderick. We will follow the White Knife down to the sea, and hire a ship at the White Harbor. Strong horses and brisk winds should bring us to King's Landing, well ahead of Ned and the Lannisters. And then, she thought, we shall see what we shall see. Okay. So, I really like a couple things here. First, I like the change on Catelyn, because so far she's not been great. I mean, she's a good mother. That's her whole character. She's a mother. But so far she has been so focused on that, on the son that fell, that she's, she basically went half mad, as she said herself. She was also quite awful to Jon Snow. And, in general, just quite unhelpful and problematic. And I understand that she's going through a lot. It makes sense. A lot of things happened all at once. It's hard to deal with. But I really like that in this moment she decides to two things. First of all, she decides to show them how strong a Tully can be. I really respect that. One. And two, I really like that the moment the burden, like the moment it says that the burden is lifted off her shoulders, is once Bran's wolf comes in and saves her. That moment, like before that, she was like, quite like, shut them up, shut the wolves up, kill them if you must, but shut them up. But in this moment, she realized that the wolves are kind of, are in a way part of them now. The wolf came and defended Bran and killed the assassin. And that moment, it was lifted from her shoulders. She realized Bran does have someone looking out for him. Like that moment, she came to completely change her view about the wolves. I like how he sees Rob. He sees him as a Stark now. Like he sees something of his father in him. I like that she's now like back at it. Like she wakes up and they tell him you slept for 4 days, and she doesn't freak out. And the first thing she does is not ask how Bran is. By this point she calmed down. She started to rationalize things. She understands there's probably not gonna be much change. And I like that. I really like that Catelyn is, it's finally like, keeping it together. I really like that, and I really just enjoy watching, reading about all these characters. The next I'm very excited is the first Sansa chapter. Again, as I've said, I really like Sansa chapters, even though at the beginning Sansa is not my favorite character. But I really enjoy her chapters. I think they're very cool, and we'll see why in a moment. Just before that, however, I'm going to do a brief intermission. We're about halfway through the stream. Well, Yeah, more or less. I'm gonna just do a quick bathroom break and I'll be right back. Just excuse me for a moment. Okay, I am back. Sorry for that. But I am back here. Let's continue with the next chapter, Sansa. Hell yeah, I'm actually really excited for Sansa. Okay, Eddard Stark had left before dawn. Septa Mordane informed Sansa as they broke their fast. The king sent for him. Another hunt, I do believe. There are still wild aurochs in these lands, I am told. I've never seen an auroch, Sansa said, feeding a piece of bacon to Lady under the table. The direwolf took it from her hand, as delicate as a queen. Septa Mordane sniffed in approval. A noble sniffed in disapproval. A noble lady does not feed dogs at her table, she said, breaking off a piece of comb and letting the honey drip down into her bread. She's not a dog, she's a direwolf, Sansa pointed out, as Lady licked her fingers with a rough tongue. Anywhere, fathers say we could keep them with us if we want. The Septa was not appeased. If you're a good girl, Sansa, you're a good girl, Sansa, but I do bow. When it comes to that creature, you're as willful as your sister Arya. She scowled. And where is Arya this morning? She wasn't hungry, Sansa said, knowing full well that her sister had probably stolen down to the kitchen hours ago and wheeled the breakfast out of some cook's boy. Do remind her to dress nicely today. They, the grey velvet, perhaps. We are all invited to ride with the Queen and Princess Myrcella in the royal wheelhouse, and we must look our best. Sansa already looked her best. She had brushed out her long auburn hair until it shone and picked her nicest blue silks. She had been looking forward to today for more than a week. It was a great honor to ride with the Queen, and besides, Prince Joffrey might be there. Her, bethro- her betrothed. Just thinking it made her feel a strange fluttering inside, even though they were not to marry for years and years. Sansa did not really know Joffrey yet, but she was already in love with him. He was all she ever dreamed her prince should be. Tall and handsome and strong, with hair like gold, she treasured every chance to spend with him, few as they are. The only thing that scared her about today was Arya. Arya had a way of ruining everything. You never knew what she would do. I'll tell her, Sansa said uncertainly, but she'll dress the way she always does. She hoped it wouldn't be too embarrassing. May I be excused? You may. Septa Mordane helped herself to more bread and honey, and Sansa slipped from the bench. Lady followed at her heels, and she ran from the inn's common room. Outside, she stood for a moment amidst the shouts and curses and creak of wooden wheels as the men broke down the tents and pavilions and loaded the wagons for another day's march. The inn was a sprawling three-story structure of pale stone, the biggest that Sansa had ever seen. But even so, it had accommodations for less than a third of the king's party, which had swollen to more than 400 with the addition of her father's household and the free riders who had joined them on the road. She found Arya on the banks. She found Arya on the banks of the Trident, trying to hold Nymeria still while she brushed dried mud from her fur. The direwolf was not enjoying the process. Arya was wearing the same riding leathers she had worn yesterday and the day before. You better put on something pretty, Sansa told her. Septa Mordane said so. We're traveling in the Queen's wheelhouse with Princess Myrcella today. I am not, Arya said, trying to brush a tangle out of Nymeria's matted her grey fur. Micah and I are going to ride upstream and look for rubies at the ford. Rubies, Sansa said lost. What rubies? Arya gave her a look like she was so stupid. Rhaegar's rubies. This is where King Robert killed him and won the crown. Sansa regarded his scrawny little sister in disbelief. You can't look for rubies. The princess is expecting us. The queen invited us both. I don't care, Arya said. The wheelhouse doesn't even have windows. You can't see a thing. What could you want to see? Sansa said, annoyed. She had been thrilled by the invitation, and and her stupid sister was going to ruin everything, just as she'd feared. It's all fields and farms and holdfasts. It is not, Arya said stubbornly. If you came with us sometimes, you'd see. I hate riding, Sansa said fervently. All it does is get you soiled and dusty and sore. Arya shrugged. Hold still, she snapped at Nymeria. I'm not hurting you. Then to Sansa, she said, when we were crossing the neck, I counted 36 flowers I never saw before. And Micah showed me a lizard lion. Sansa shuddered. They had been they had been 12 days crossing the neck, rumbling down a crooked causeway through an endless black bog, and she had hated every moment of it. The air had been damp and clammy, the causeway so narrow they could not even make proper camp at night. They had to stop right on the King's Road. Dense thickets of half drowned trees pressed close around them, branches dripping with curtains of pale fungus. Huge flowers bloomed in the mud and floated on pools of stagnant water. But if you were stupid enough to leave the causeway to pluck them, there were quicksands waiting to suck you down, and snakes watching from the trees, and lizard lions floating half submerged in the water, like black logs with eyes and teeth. None of which stopped Arya, of course. One day she came back grinning her horsey green, her hair all tangled, and her clothes covered in mud, clutching a raggedy bunch of purple and green flowers for father. Sansa kept hoping he would tell Arya to behave herself and act like the highborn lady she was supposed to be. But he never did. He only hugged her and thanked her for the flowers. That just made her worse. Then it turned out the purple flowers were called poison kisses, and Arya got a rash on her arms. Sansa would have thought that might have taught her a lesson, but Arya laughed about it. The next day, she rubbed mud all over her arms like some ignorant bug woman, just because her friend Micah told her it would stop the itching. She had bruises on her arms and shoulders too, dark purple welts and faded green and yellow splotches. Sansa had seen them when her sister undressed for sleep. How she had gotten those, only the seven gods knew. Arya was still going on, brushing out Nymeria's tangles and chattering about the things she'd seen on the trek south. Last week we found this haunted watchtower, and the day before we chased a herd of wild horses. You should have seen them run when they caught the scent of Nymeria. A wolf wriggled. The wolf wriggled in her grasp, and Arya scolded her. "Stop that! I have to do the other side. You're all muddy." "You're not supposed to leave the column," Sansa reminded her. "Father said so." Arya shrugged. "I didn't go far. Anyway, Nymeria was with me the whole time. I don't always go off either. Sometimes it's just fun to ride along with the wagons and talk to the people." Sansa knew all about the sorts of people Arya liked to talk to: squires and grooms and serving girls, older men and naked children, rough-spoken free riders of uncertain birth. Arya would make friends with anybody. This Micah was the worst. A butcher's boy, 13 and wild. He slept in the wagon and smelled of the slaughtering block. Just the sight of him was enough to make Sansa feel sick, but Arya seemed to prefer his company to hers. Sansa was running out of patience now. "You have to come with me," she told her sister firmly. "You can't refuse the queen. Septa Mordane will expect you." Arya ignored her. She gave a hard yank with the brush. Nymeria growled and spun away, affronted. "Come back here." "There's going to be lemon cakes and tea," Sansa went on, all adult and reasonable. Lady brushed her leg. Sansa scratched her ears the way she liked, and Lady sat beside her on her haunches, watching Arya chase Nymeria. Um, would you want to ride a smelly old horse and get all sore and sweaty when you could recline on feather pillows and eat cakes with the queen? "I don't like the queen," Arya said casually. Sansa sucked it in her breath, shocked that even Arya would say such a thing. But her sister prattled on, heedless. "She won't even let me bring Nymeria." She thrust the brush under her belt and stalked her wolf. Nymeria watched her approach warily. "A royal wheelhouse is no place for a wolf," Sansa said, "and Princess Myrcella is afraid of them. You know that." Marcella is a little baby. Arya grabbed Nymeria around her neck, but the moment she pulled out the brush again, the direwolf wriggled free and bounded off. Frustrated, Arya threw down the brush. Bad wolf, she shouted. Sansa couldn't help but smile a little. The kennel master once told her that an animal takes after its master. She gave Lady a quick little hug. Lady licked her cheek. Sansa giggled. Arya heard and railed around, glaring. I don't care what you said. I'm going rowdy. I'm going riding. Uh, Her long, horsey face got that stubborn look that she meant she was going to do something willful. Gods be true, Arya. Sometimes you act like such a child, Sansa said. I'll go by myself then. It will be ever so much nicer that way. Lady and I will eat all the lemon cakes and just have the best time without you. She turned to walk off, but Arya shouted after her. They won't let you bring Lady either. She was gone before Sansa could think of a reply, chasing Nymeria along the river. Alone and humiliated, Sansa took the long way back to the inn, where she knew Septa Mordane would be waiting. Lady patted quietly by her side. She was almost in tears. All she wanted was for things to be nice and pretty, the way they were in the songs. Why couldn't Arya be sweet and delicate and kind like Princess Myrcella? She would have liked a sister like that. Sansa could never understand how two sisters, born only 2 years apart, could be so different. It would have been easier if Arya had been a bastard, like their half brother Jon. She even looked like Jon, with the long face and brown hair of the stars, and nothing of their lady mother in her face or her coloring. And Jon's mother had been common, or so people whispered. Once when she was little, Sansa had even asked Mother if perhaps there hadn't been some mistake. Perhaps the Grumpkins had stolen her real sister. But Mother had only laughed and said no. Arya was her daughter, and Sansa's true-born sister, blood of their blood. Sansa could not think why Mother would want to lie about it. She supposed it had to be true. As she neared the center of the camp, her distress was quickly forgotten. A crowd had gathered around the queen's wheelhouse. Sansa heard excited voices, buzzing like a hive of bees. The doors had been thrown open, she saw, and the queen stood at the top of the wooden steps, smiling down at someone. She heard her saying, "The council does us great honor, my lords, my good lords." "What is happening?" she asked the squire she knew. "The council sent riders from King's Landing to escort us the rest of the way," he told her. "An honor guard for the king." Anxious to see, Sansa led Lady clear a path through the crowd. People moved aside hastily for the direwolf. When she got closer, she saw two knights kneeling before the queen, in armor so fine and gorgeous that it made her blink. One knight wore an intricate suit of white emerald and enameled scales, brilliant as a field of new fallen snow, with silver chasings and clasps that glittered in the sun. When he removed his helm, Sansa knew he was an saw that he was an old man with hair as pale as his armor, yet he seemed strong and graceful for all that. From his shoulders hung the pure white cloak of the King's Guard. His companion was a man near 20, whose armor was steel plate of a deep forest green. He was the handsomest man Sansa had ever set eyes upon, tall and powerful, made with jet black hair that fell to his shoulders and framed a clean-shaven face and laughing green eyes to match his armor. Cradled under one arm was an antlered helm, its magnificent rack shimmering in gold. At first, Sansa did not notice the third stranger. He did not kneel with the others. He stood to one side, beside their horses, a gaunt, grim man who watched the proceedings in silence. His face was pock-marked and beardless, with deepest eyes and hollow cheeks. Though he was not an old man, only a few wisps of hair remained to him, sprouting above his ears, sprouting about his ears. But those he had grown long as a woman's. His armor was iron grain chainmail over layers of boiled leather, plain and unadorned, and it spoke of age and hard use. Above his right shoulder, the stained leather hilt of the blade strapped to his back was visible, and to his back was visible. A two-handed greatsword, too long to be worn at his side. "The king is gone hunting," But I know he will be pleased to see you when he returns, the queen was saying to the two knights who knelt before her. But Sansa could not take her eyes off the third man. He seemed to feel the weight of her gaze. Slowly he turned his head. Lady growled. A terror was as overwhelming as anything Sansa Stark had ever felt filled her suddenly. She stepped backward and bumped into someone. Strong hands grasped her by the shoulders, and for a moment Sansa thought it was her father. But when she turned, it was the burned face of Sandor Clegane, looking down at her, his mouth twisted in a terrible mockery of a smile. "You are shaking, girl," he said, his voice rasping. "Do I frighten you so much?" He did, and he had since she first laid eyes on the ruin that fire had made of his face, though it seemed to her now that he was not half so terrifying as the other. Still, Sansa raged away from him, and the hound laughed, and Lady moved between them, rumbling a warning. Sansa dropped to her knees to wrap her arms around the wolf. They were all gathered around, gaping. She could feel their eyes on her, and here and there she heard muttered comments and titters of laughter. "A wolf," a man said, and someone else said, "Seven hells, that's a dire wolf." And the first man said, "What's it doing in camp?" And the hound's rasping voice replied, "The Starks use them for wet nurses." Sansa realized that the two stranger knights were looking down at her and Lady, swords in their hands. And then she was frightened again, and ashamed. Tears filled her eyes. She heard the queen say, "Joffrey, go to her." And the prince was there. "Leave her alone," Joffrey said. He stood over her, beautiful in blue wool and black leather, his golden curls shining in the sun like a crown. He gave her his hand, drew her to her feet. Uh, to her feet. "What is it, sweet lady? Why are you afraid? No one will hurt you. Put away your swords, all of you. The wolf is her little pet, that's all." He looked at Sandor Clegane. "And you, dog, away with you. You're scaring my betrothed." The hound, ever faithful, bowed and slid away quietly through the press. Sansa struggled to steady herself. She felt like such a fool. She was a Stark of Winterfell, a noble lady, and someday she would be queen. "It was not him, my sweet prince," she tried to explain. "It was the other one." The two stranger knights exchanged a look. "Pain?" chuckled the young man in the green armor. The older man in white spoke to Sansa gently. "After Sir Ilyn frightens me as well, sweet lady. He has a fearsome aspect. As well as he should, the queen had descended from the wheelhouse, as the spectators parted to make way for her. If the wicked do not fear the king's justice, you have put the wrong man in the office." Sansa finally found her words. "Then surely you have chosen the right one, your grace," she said, and the gale of laughter erupted all around her. "Well spoken, child," said the old man in white, as befits the daughter of Eddard Stark. "I am honored to know you, however irregular the manner of our meeting. I am Sir Barristan Selmy of the Kingsguard." He bowed. Sansa knew the name, and now the courtesies that Septa Mortain had taught her over the years came back to her. "Lord Commander of the Kingsguard," she said, "and Counselor to Robert, our King, and to Aerys Targaryen before him. The honor is mine. Goodbye." Even in the far north, the singers praised the deeds of Barristan the Bold. The Green Knight laughed again. "Barristan the Old, you mean? Don't flatter him too sweetly, child. He thinks over much of himself already." He smiled at her. "Now, Wolf Girl, if you can put a name to me as well, then I must concede that you are truly your hand's daughter." Joffrey stiffened beside her. Have a, have a care how you address my betrothed." "I can answer," Sansa said quickly, to quell her prince's anger. She smiled at the Green Knight. "Your helmet bears golden antlers, my lord. The stag is the sigil of the royal house. King Robert has two brothers. By your extreme youth, you can only be Renly Baratheon, Lord of Storm's End, and Counselor to the King. And so, and so I name you." Sir Barristan chuckled. "By his extreme youth, he can only be a prancing jackanapes, and so I name him." There was general laughter, led by Lord Renly himself. The tension of a few moments ago was gone, and Sansa was beginning to feel comfortable, until Sir Ilyn Payne shouldered two men aside and stood before her, unsmiling. He did not say a word. Lady bared her teeth and began to growl. a low rumble full of menace, but this time Sansa silenced the wolf with a gentle hand on her onto the head. I'm sorry if I offended you, Sir Ellen, she said. She waited um, for an answer, but not came. As the headsman looked at her, his pale, colorless eyes seemed to strip the clothes away from her, and then the skin, leaving her soul naked before him. Still, silent, he turned and walked away. Sansa did not understand. She looked at her prince. Did I say something wrong, Your Grace? Why will he not speak to me? Sir Elin has not been feeling talkative these past 14 years, Lord Rendick commented with a sly smile. Geoffrey gave his uncle a look of pure loathing, then took Sansa's hand on his own. Aerys Targaryen had his tongue ripped out with hot pincers. He speaks most eloquently with his sword, however, the queen said, and his devotion to our realm is unquestioned. Then she smiled graciously and said, Sansa, the good counselors and I must speak together until the king returns with your father. I fear we have to postpone your day with Myrcella. Please give your sweet sister my apologies. Geoffrey, perhaps you would be so kind as to entertain our guest today. It would be my pleasure, mother, Geoffrey said very formally. He took her by the arm and led her away from the wheelhouse, and Sansa's spirit took flight. A whole day with her prince. She gazed at Geoffrey worshipfully. He was so gallant, she thought. The way he had rescued her from Sir Ellen and the Hound. Why, it was almost like the songs. Like the time Serwyn of the Mirror Shield saved the Princess Dorisa from the giants, or Prince Aemon the Dragon Knight championing Queen Naerys' honor against evil Sir Morgil's slanders. The touch of Joffrey's hand on her sleeve made her heart beat faster. What would you like to do? Be with you, Sansa thought, but she said, whatever you'd like to do, my prince. Joffrey reflected a moment. We could go riding. Oh, I love riding, Sansa said. Joffrey glanced back at Lady, who was following at their heels. Your wolf is liable to frighten the horses, and my dog seems to frighten you. Let us leave them both behind and set off on our own. What do you say? Sansa hesitated. If you like, she said uncertainly. I suppose I could tie Lady up. She did not quite understand, though. I didn't know you had a dog. Geoffrey, Geoffrey laughed. He's my mother's dog, in truth. She has set him to guard me, and so he does. You mean the hound, she said. She wanted to hit herself for being so slow. Her prince would never love her if she seemed stupid. Is it safe to leave him behind? Prince Geoffrey looked annoyed that she would even ask. Have no fear, lady. I am almost a man grown, and I do not fight with wood like your brothers. All I need is this. He drew his sword and showed it to her. A long sword, adroitly shrunken to suit a boy of 12, gleaming blue steel, castle forged and double edged, with a leather grip and a lion's head pommel in gold. Sansa exclaimed over it admiringly, and Joffrey looked pleased. I call it Lion's Tooth, he said, and so they left her dire wolf and his bodyguard behind them when they ranged east along the north bank of the Trident, with no company save Lion's Tooth. It was a glorious day, a magical day. The air was warm and heavy with the scent of flowers, and the woods here had a gentle beauty that Sansa had never seen in the north. Prince Joffrey's mount was a blood-bay courser, swift as the wind, and he rode it with reckless abandon, so fast that Sansa was hard pressed to keep up on her mare. It was a day for adventure. They explored the caves by the riverbank and tracked a shadow cat to its lair. And when they grew hungry, Joffrey found a holdfast by its smoke and told them to fetch food and wine for their prince and his lady. They dined on trout fresh from the river, and Sansa drank more wine than she ever had drunk before. My father only let us have one cup, and only in feasts, she confessed to her prince. My betrothed can drink as much as she wants, Joffrey said, refilling her cup. They went more slowly after they had eaten. Joffrey sang for her as they rode, his voice high and sweet and pure. Sansa was a little dizzy from the wine. Shouldn't we be starting back? She asked. Soon, Joffrey said. The battleground is right up ahead, where the river bends. That was where my father killed Rhaegar Targaryen, you know. He smashed in his chest, crunch, right through the armor. Joffrey summoned an imaginary warhammer to show her how it was done. Then my uncle Jaime killed old Aerys, and my father was king. What's that sound? Sansa heard it. Sansa heard it too. Um, Floating through the woods, a kind of wooden clacking. Snack, snack, snack. I don't know, she said. It made her nervous, though. Joffrey, let's go back. I want to see what it is. Joffrey turned his horse in the direction of the sounds, and Sansa had no choice but to follow. The noises grew louder and more distinct, the clack of wood on wood, and as they grew closer, they heard heavy breathing as well, and now and then a grunt. There's someone. Someone's there, Sansa said anxiously. She found herself thinking of Lady, wishing the wolf was with her. You're safe with me. Joffrey drew his lion's tooth from its sheath. The sound of steel on leather made her tremble. This way, he said, riding through a stand of trees. Beyond, in a clearing overlooking the river, they came upon a boy and a girl playing at knights. Their swords were wooden sticks, broom handles from the look at them, and they were rushing across the grass, swinging at each other lustily. The boy was years older, a head taller, and much stronger. He was pressing the attack. The girl, a scrawny thing in soiled leathers, and was dodging and managing to get her stick in the way of most of the boy's blows, but not all. When she tried to lunge at him, he caught her stick with his own, swept it aside, and slicked his wood down hard on her fingers. She cried out and lost her weapon. Prince Joffrey laughed. The boy looked around, wide eyed and startled, and dropped his stick in the grass. The girl glared at them, sucking on her knuckles to take the sting out, and Sansa was horrified. Arya, she called out incredulously. Go away, Arya shouted back at them, angry tears in her eyes. What are you doing here? Leave us alone. Joffrey glanced from Arya to Sansa and back at them. And back again. Your sister? She nodded, blushing. Joffrey examined the boy, an ungainly lad with a coarse, freckled face and the thick red hair. And who are you, boy? He asked in a commanding tone that took no notice of the fact that the other one was a year his senior. Micah, the boy muttered. He recognized the prince and averted his eyes. My lord. He's the butcher's boy, Sansa said. He's my friend, Arya said sharply. You leave him alone. A butcher boy who wants to be a knight, is it? Joffrey swung down from his mount, sword in hand. Pick up your sword, butcher's boy, he said, his eye bright in amusement. Let us see how good you are. Micah stood there, frozen with fear. Joffrey walked towards him. Go on, pick it up. Or do you only fight little girls? She asked me to, my lord, Micah said. She asked me to. Sansa had only to glance at Arya and see the flush on her sister's face to know the boy was telling the truth. But Joffrey was in no mood to listen. The wine had made him wild. Are you going to pick up your sword? Micah shook his head. It's only a stick, my lord. It's not no sword. It's only a stick. And you're only a butcher's boy, and no knight. Joffrey lifted Lion's tooth and laid its point to Micah's cheek below the eye, as the butcher's boy stood trembling. That was my lady's sister you were hitting. Do you know that? A bright bud of blood blossomed where his sword pressed into Micah's flesh, and a slow red line trickled down the boy's cheek. Stop it! Arya screamed. She grabbed her fallen stick. Sansa was afraid. Arya, you stay out of this. I won't hurt him much, Prince Joffrey told Arya, never taking his eyes off the butcher's boy. Arya went for him. Sansa slid off her mare, but she was too slow. Arya swung with both her hands. There was a loud crack as the wood split against the back of the prince's head, and then everything happened at once before Sansa's horrified eyes. Joffrey staggered and whirled around, roaring curses. Micah ran for the trees as fast as his legs would take him. Arya swung at the prince again, but this time Joffrey caught the blow on Lion's tooth and sent her broken stick flying from her fangs. The back of his head was all bloody, and his eyes were on fire. Sansa was shrieking, No, no, stop it, both of you. You're spoiling it. But no one was listening. Arya scooped up a rock and hurled it at Joffrey's head. She hit his horse instead, and the blood bay rayed and went galloping off after Micah. Stop it! Don't! Stop it! Sansa screamed. Joffrey slashed at Arya with his sword, screaming obscenities, terrible words, filthy words. Arya darted back, frightened now, but Joffrey followed, hounding her towards the woods, backing her up against a tree. Sansa didn't know what to do. She watched helplessly, almost blind from her tears. Then a grey blur flashed past her, and suddenly Nymeria was there, leaping just closing around Joffrey's sword arm. The steel fell from his fingers as the wolf knocked him off his feet, and they rolled in the grass. The wolf snarling and ripping at him, the prince shrieking in pain. Get it off! He screamed. Get it off! Arya's voice cracked like a whip. Nymeria! The direwolf let go of Joffrey and moved to Arya's side. The prince lay in the grass, whimpering, cradling his mangled arm. His shirt was soaked in blood. Arya said, She didn't hurt you. Much. She picked up Lion's tooth where it had fallen and stood over him, holding the sword with both hands. Joffrey made a scared, whimpery sound as he looked at her. No, he said. Don't hurt me. I'll tell my mother. You leave him alone, Arya screamed at her sister. Arya whirled and heaved the sword into the air, putting her whole body into the throw. The blue steel flashed in the sun as the sword spun over the river. It hit the water and vanished with a splash. Joffrey moaned. Arya ran off to her horse, Nymeria looping at her heels. After they had gone, Sansa went to Prince Joffrey. His eyes were closed in pain, his breath ragged. Sansa knelt beside him. Joffrey, she sobbed. Oh, look at what they did. Look at what they did, my poor prince. Don't be afraid. I'll ride to the holdfast and bring you help. Tenderly, she reached out and brushed his brushed back his soft blonde hair. His eyes snapped open and looked at her, and there was nothing but loathing there, nothing but vile contempt. Then go, he spit at her, and don't touch me. Okay. So, as always, Joffrey is the worst. I actually forgot to change back from after the intermission screen. So I guess for a little while there's an intermission screen for like the past 30 minutes. Sorry about that. But yeah, anyways. Sorry, I forgot to change the intermission screen. Anyways, so this last chapter, pretty good. Arya being a badass like she is, Joffrey being a little shit like he is, Sansa being unsufferable like she is. Okay. Yeah, that's about how we get. I really like everything. I really like how Sansa, abuse herself. She at one point in the chapter, she's like, "Oh, she said all adult like," and it was like, "What?" She sees herself as an adult. She's like this petulant, kind of spoiled, clearly classist, very like asshole. She's like, "Ugh, peasants," right? And then Arya's not. I really like that about Arya. Arya doesn't give a shit. She sees people. If she likes them, she talks to them. That's very good. That's a good quality, especially for someone in a position of even power or something. Anyone in a high position of any sort as a lady, that's a good quality to have, I believe. And yeah, so she's also kind of a hypocrite. It's like she's just like she just wants everything to be like her pretty songs, and it's like, oh, I hate writing. But then Joffrey's like, we could go writing, and she's like, oh, I love writing. And Joffrey's just in here. We can see that he can act all charming and Prince like, but when he's a little drunk, you can see at the end of the day he's just a little cunt. You just see him be the worst. He comes in and threatens Micah and wants to hurt him. He's like, I'm not gonna hurt him much. So he's gonna hurt him a little bit, just because he feels like it. Because he likes, but we also see that he's kind of a coward. We saw with Tyrion when all his reaction was to whimper and be like, "I'll tell mother." And once again, he does that once Arya overpowers him. Nymeria overpowers him, but and he see that he's just full of rage and pride. How Sansa comes in and tenderly like treats him, and then Joffrey's like, "No, fuck you, just go then, and bring help." Terrible, terrible. But I like this chapter. It establishes a lot of the relationships between these characters for the book to come. We're about to see, how everything. Oh, excuse me. We're about to see, how this ends up, because this is a pretty, considerable problem here that they just found themselves in. So yeah, let's see what uh, what happens. Next chapter is from Eddard's point of view, from Ned. Okay, they found her, my lord. Ned rose quickly. Our men or Lannisters? It was Jory, his steward Vion Poole replied. She's not been harmed. Thank the gods, Ned said. His men had been searching for Arya for 4 days now, but the Queen's men had been out hunting as well. Where is she? Where is she? Tell Jory to bring her here at once. I'm sorry, my lord, Poole told him. The guards on the gate were Lannister men, and they informed the Queen when Jory brought her in. She's being taken directly before the king. Damn the woman, Ned said, striding to the door. Find Sansa and bring her to the audience chamber. Her voice may be needed. He descended the tower steps in a red rage. He had led search himself for the first 3 days and had scarcely slept an hour since Arya had disappeared. This morning he had been so heartsick and weary he could scarcely stand. But now his fury was on him, filling him with strength. Men called out to him as he crossed the castle yard, but Ned ignored them in his haste. He could have run, but he was still the king's hand, and the hand must keep his dignity. Um, he was aware of the eyes that followed him. He of the muttered voices, wondering what he would do. The castle was the castle was a modest holding, a half a day's ride south of the Trident. The royal party had made themselves the uninvited guests of its lord, Sir Raymond Derry, while the hunt for Arya and the butcher's boys was conducted on both sides of the river. They were not welcome visitors. Sir Raymond lived under the king's peace, but his family had fought beneath Rhaegar's dragon banners at the Trident, and his three older brothers had died there. A truth neither Robert nor Sir Raymond had forgotten. With King's men, Derry men, Lannister men, and Stark men all crammed into a castle far too small for them, tensions burned hot and heavy. The king had appropriated Sir Raymond's audience chamber, and that was where Ned found them. The room was crowded when he burst in. Too crowded, he thought. Left alone, he and Robert might have been able to settle the matter amicably. Robert was slumped in Derry's high seat at the far end of the room, his face closed and sullen. Cersei Lannister and her son stood beside him. The queen had her hand on Joffrey's shoulder. Thick silken bandages still covered the boy's arm. Arya stood in the center of the room, alone, but for Jory Castle, every eye upon her. Arya! Ned called out loudly. He went to her, his boots ringing on the stone floor. When she saw him, she cried out and began to sob. Ned went to one knee and took her in his arms. She was shaking. I'm sorry, she sobbed. I'm sorry, I'm sorry. I know, he said. She felt so tiny in his arms, nothing but a scrawny little girl. It was hard to see how she had caused so much trouble. Are you hurt? No, her face was dirty, and her tears left pink traces down her cheeks. Hungry some. I ate some berries, but there was nothing else. We'll feed you soon enough, Ned promised. He rose to face the king. What is what is the meaning of this? His eyes his eyes swept the room, searching for friendly faces, but his own men they were but for his own men they were few enough. Sir Raymond Derry guarded his look as well. Lord Renly wore half a smile that might mean anything, and Sir Barristan was grave. The rest were Lannister men and hostile. Their only good fortune was that both Jaime Lannister and Sandor Clegane were missing, leading searches north of the Trident. Why was I not why was I not told my daughter had been found? Ned demanded, his voice ringing. Why was she not brought to me at once? He spoke to Robert, but it was Cersei Lannister who answered. How dare you speak to your king in that manner? At that, the king stirred. Quiet, woman, he snapped. He sighed, he straightened in his seat. I am sorry, Ned. I never meant to frighten the girl. It seemed best to bring her here and get the business done with quickly. And what business is that? Ned put ice in his voice. The queen stepped forward. You know full well, Stark. This girl of yours attacked my son, her and her butcher's boy. That animal of hers tried to tear his arm off. That's not true, Arya said loudly. She just bit him a little. He was hurting Micah. Joff told us what happened, the queen said. You and the butcher boy beat him with clubs while you set your wolf on him. That's not how it was, Arya said, close to tears again. Ned put a hand on her shoulder. Yes, it is, Joffrey insisted. They all attacked me. She threw lion's tooth in the river. No, Ned noticed he did not so much as glance at Arya as he spoke. Liar, Arya yelled. Shut up, the prince yelled back. Enough, the king roared, rising from his seat, his voice thick with irritation. Silence fell. He glowered at Arya through his thick beard. Now, child, you will tell me what happened. Tell it all, and tell it true. 'Tis a great crime to lie to a king. Then he looked over at his son. When she is done, you will have your turn. Until then, hold your tongue. As Arya began her story, Ned heard the door open behind him. He glanced back and saw Vion enter with Sansa. They stood quietly at the back of the hall as Arya spoke. When she got to the part where she threw Joffrey's sword into the middle of the trident, Renly Baratheon began to laugh. The king bristled. Sir Barristan escort my brother from the hall before he chokes. Lord Renly stifled his laughter. My brother is too kind. I can find the door myself. He bowed to Joffrey. Perchance later you'll tell me how a 9-year-old girl the size of a wet rat managed to disarm you with a broom handle and throw your sword in the river. As the door swung behind him, Ned heard him say, Lion's tooth, and gulped once more. Prince Joffrey was pale as he began his very different versions of events. When his son was done talking, the king rose heavily from his seat, looking like a man who wanted to be anyone but there. What in all the 7 hells am I supposed to make of this? He said. He says one thing, she says another. They were not the only ones present, Ned said. Sansa, come here. Ned had heard her version of the story. Not Arya had vanished. He knew the truth. Tell us what happened. His eldest daughter stepped forward instantly. She was dressed in blue velvet trimmed with white, a silver chain around her neck. Her thick auburn hair had been brushed until it shone. She blinked at her sister, then at the young prince. I don't know, she said tearfully, looking as though she wanted to bolt. I don't remember. Everything happened so fast. I didn't see. You rotten, Arya shrieked. She flew at her sister like an arrow, knocking Sansa down to the ground, pummeling her. Liar! 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 Arya, stop it! Nat shouted. Jory pulled her off her sister, kicking. Sansa was pale and shaken as Ned lifted her back to her feet. Are you hurt? He asked, but she was staring at Arya. She did not seem to hear. The girl is as wild as the filthy animal of hers, Cersei Lannister said. Robert, I want her punished. 7 hells, Robert swore. Cersei, look at her. She's a child. What would you have me do? Whip her through the streets? Damn it. Children fight. It's over. No lasting harm was done. The queen was furious. Joff will carry those scars the rest of his life. Robert Baratheon looked at his eldest son. So he will. Perhaps they will teach him a lesson. Ned, see that your daughter is disciplined. I will do the same with my boy. Gladly, your grace, Ned said with vast relief. Robert started to walk away, but the queen was not done. And what of the direwolf? She called after him. What of the beast that savaged your son? The king stooped, turned back, frowned. I'd forgotten about the damn wolf. Ned could see Arya tense in Jory's arms. Jory spoke up quickly. We found no trace of the direwolf, your great. Robert did not look unhappy. No? So be it. The, the queen raised her voice. 100 golden dragons to the man who brings me its skin. A costly pelt, Robert grumbled. I want no part of this woman. You can damn well buy your first with Lannister gold. The queen regarded him coldly. I had not thought you so niggardly. The king I thought to wed would have laid a wolf skin across my bed before the sun went down. Robert's face darkened with anger. That would be a fine trick without a wolf. We have a wolf, Cersei Lannister said. Her voice was very quiet, but her green eyes shone with triumph. It took them all a moment to comprehend her words, but they did. The king shrugged irritably. As you will. Have Sir Aelin see to it. Robert, you cannot mean this, Ned protested. The king was in no mood for more argument. Enough, Ned. I will hear no more. A direwolf is a savage beast. Sooner or later it would have turned on your girl, the same way the other did on my son. Get her dog. Get her a dog. She'll be happier for it. That's when Sansa finally seemed to comprehend. Her eyes were frightened as they went to her father. He doesn't mean lady, does he? She saw the truth on his face. No, she said. No, not lady. Lady didn't bite anybody. She's good. Lady wasn't there, Arya shouted angrily. You leave her alone. Stop them, Arya pleaded. Don't let them do it. Please, plead. It wasn't Lady. It wasn't Armyria. Arya did it. You can't. It wasn't Lady. Don't let them hurt Lady. I'll make her be good. I promise. I promise. She started to cry. All Ned could do was take her in his arms and hold her while she wept. He looked across the room at Robert, his old friend, closer than any brother. Please, Robert, for the love you gave me, for the love you bore my sister, please. The king looked at them for a moment, then he turned his eyes on his wife. Damn you, Cersei, he said with loathing. Ned stood gently, disengaging himself from Sansa's grasps. All the weariness of the past 4 days had returned to him. Do it yourself, then, Robert, he said in a voice cold and sharp as steel. At least have the courage to do it yourself. Robert looked at Ned with flat, dead eyes and left without a word, his footsteps heavy as lead. Silence filled the hall. Where's the dire wolf? Cersei Lannister asked when her husband was gone. Beside her, Prince Jeoffrey was smiling. The beast is chained outside the gatehouse, your grace, Sir Berenstain Selmy answered reluctantly. Send Dylan Payne. No, Ned said. Jury, take the girls back to their rooms and bring me ice. The worst tasted of bile in his throat, but he forced them out. If it must be done, I will do it. Cersei Lannister regarded him suspiciously. You, Stark? Is this some trick? Why would you do such a thing? They were all stared at him, but it was Sansa's look that cut. She is of the north. She deserves better than a butcher. He left the room with his eyes burning and his daughter's wails echoing in his ears. He found the dire wolf pup where they chained her. Nady sat beside her for a while. Lady, he said, tasting the name. He had never paid much attention to the names the children had picked, but looking at her now, he knew that Sansa had chosen well. She was the smallest of the litter, the prettiest, the most gentle and trusting. She looked at him with bright golden eyes, and he ruffled her thick gray hair. Shortly, Jory brought him ice. When it was over, he said, Choose 4 men and have them take the body north, bury her at Winterfell. All the way? Jory said, astonished. All the way, Nay affirmed. The Lannister woman shall never have this skinned. When he was walking back to the tower to give himself up to sleep at last, he was walking back to the tower to give himself up to sleep at last, when Sandor Clegane and his riders came pounding through the castle gate, back from their hunt. There was something slung over the back of his destrier, a heavy shape wrapped in the bloody cloak. No sign of your daughter, no sign of your daughter, Hound, the Hound rasped down. But the day was not wholly wasted. We got her little pet. He reached back and shoved the burden off. It fell with a thump in front of Ned. Bending, Ned pulled back the cloak, dreading the words he would have to find for Arya. But it was not Nymeria after all. It was the butcher's boy, Micah, his body covered in dried blood. He had been cut almost in half from shoulder to waist by some terrible blow stroke from above. You rode him down, Ned said. The Hound's eyes seemed to glitter through the steel of that hideous dog's head helm. He ran. He looked at Ned's face and laughed, but not very fast. Okay, and here uh, we have we had a brief taste of what relationships between these characters are gonna be like. There's a lot of tension. There's a lot of Robert's kind of angry because he clearly is more on the side of Ned, but he still kind of has to like please his wife. Uh, it's like they didn't find the direwolf, and Robert's like, oh okay, fine. He clearly didn't want to deal with this, and I like the way he decided to handle it. Instead of punishing Arya or doing anything, it was just like, you know what, Ned, you discipline her, I'll discipline my own. And I really like that Renly, the way Renly mocked Joffrey. Like, you let that little thing like grab your sword, disarm you, and just throw your sword in the river. He laughed, and Joffrey was like, "It's lion's tooth," which is something else important. Like, his sword is more Lannister than Baratheon, even though he's Joffrey Baratheon. So that's interesting. I think that's kind of important to keep in mind. But yeah, no, I think this is a pretty cool chapter. This is kind of why I liked Sansa chapters. A lot of plot happens in her chapters. A lot of things. A lot of times she herself doesn't realize it because she's very naive. I really like that in her chapter she calls herself all adult-like and whatnot, but it's not. So a lot of plot happens, like we saw. And now in Ned's chapter, we see the aftermath. We see, all these that happen. These are two chapters that basically come together. And yeah, that's it's pretty crappy. We can see that Cersei is a bitch, that Joffrey is also a bitch. He's more of a little bitch, but um, we see that the Lannisters are kind of just awful, you know. Um, and yeah, and Robert is like he doesn't have the patience for these kind of things. But all in all, I feel like Robert handled it well enough, except for the "let's punish the wolf." You know, I feel like, for example, I really like in the show, like Renly is not there in the show. Renly appears until later in the show, so I really like that Robert that they in the show they actually gave Robert kind of that line that Renly like that mockery. Like I in the show like Joffrey's bitching about like, oh, she hurt me, she took my sword, and then Robert like looks at him like all like kind of like grossed out and he's like, you let the little girl disarm you, and Joffrey just kind of shuts up all ashamed. Like, I like that. Joffrey's worse in the books that he's in the show. He's more the same kind of like the same with Sansa. I didn't really care for her in the show, but I was kind of indifferent for the most part. But in the show, I kind of like her again because she's classy. She's really mean. She's like, oh, low-born scum, basically, as we saw in her chapter. She's a hypocrite. She's very pampered, very naive, uh, very she likes to put herself in a pedestal and act like she's better than people. And like Arya doesn't do that, and so it's easy to like Arya over Sansa. But I really like the way that through this book and through all the books, reality comes crashing down on Sansa. And not because I like her, suffering or anything. It's just to me very interesting. It's kind of fascinating to see the way that she views the world pit against how the world actually is, and her having to deal with that comes from that makes for compelling storytelling, in my opinion. So yeah, I really like that. I really enjoy. Like at the end, they killed Lady. That's not fair. And so far, Sansa is the only one that does not have her direwolf out of the Stark children, which I think is an important, thing to consider, to be and to keep in mind. She's the only one. You could argue that that's symbolism. She's the only one who's not a wolf. The other ones are Starks, but Sansa's a little bit more Tully, I guess. She's more of a proper Southern lady, um, and that's why she gets along. But Arya is kind of wild, and she likes to play, and she's really fun to read about. So she's more wolf. Rob has more of that that fears, like that, like Catelyn said in his chapter. Rob is more like, oh, for once he saw something of his father in him. He's clearly a Stark. We haven't seen much of Rickon and Bran, but we'll see. I'm sure we'll see that soon enough. Bran is mostly a child. As he said, he's gentle. I feel like he represents also, that doesn't make him not a wolf. I feel he represents that other softer side of wolf, because at the end of the day, wolves are still kind of like dogs. They're a little wilder than dogs, but they can still, be to some extent tamed, and I don't know if fully trained. I don't know if they have the evolutionary, like if they've evolved to do that. I think their instincts are a little stronger in wolves, yeah, they, to some extent, they can be loyal, they can be very gentle and loving like a dog. uh and Bran, I feel like he's supposed to represent more of that in what little we've seen of him. He's curious, and in a way he's also wild. He climbs and he's free, and you know uh all of that. And Jon Snow, he's in many ways the most Stark. So even though he's not very, like, doesn't have a lot of wolf traits, like he's not wild, like, but he is the most Stark of them all, which in a way you could argue he's a wolf that way. He's the one that looks the most Stark aside from Arya, and he's a lot like Ned. He's cold, he's quiet, he's kind of sullen. Uh, Even though he's not so much as Ned, but he still is. I like that. I like that a lot. I think it's good characterization, and it's interesting to see all of this. Um, yeah, and I like that his wolf, uh, like Ghost, actually kind of reflects that in many ways. Like the white wolf, which, for those of you who don't know, something that's common in bastards from noble houses is that they sometimes use the sigil, like if they earn it, like in battle, like if they get knighted or something. uh, they usually use the sigil of their house with reversed colors. So the colors of the Starks are a gray dire wolf across a white field. So Jon Snow's sigil would be a white dire wolf across a gray field. And I really like that in a way you could argue that the white wolf is the most Stark of them all. But then again, that's only because that's what probably the one we've seen the most of, aside from Ned. Um, so we don't know enough yet. Maybe Rob is just as much or even more Stark. You know, uh, we need to see more of maybe Rickon, for as young as he is. Maybe he has some like clear Stark in him. Uh, so yeah, we've yet to see. So let's continue. Um, let's continue. Next chapter is Bran. Also, poor Micah, the butcher's boy. The Hound is also pretty horrible. He's a pretty interesting character. Like, I really like reading about the Hound because at the end of the day, he's interesting. He's not a great person though. But yeah, let's see. Bran. So, okay. It seemed as though he had been falling for years. Fly, a voice whispered in the darkness. But Bran did not know how to fly. All he could do was fall. Mr. Lewin made a little boy of clay, baked him in, baked him till he was hard and brittle, dressed him in Bran's clothes, and flung him off a roof. Bran remembered the way he had shattered. But I never fall, he said, falling. The ground was so far below him he could barely make it out through the gray mists that whirled around him. But he could feel how far he was falling, and he knew what was waiting for him down there. Even in dreams, you could not fall forever. He could. He would wake up in the. He would wake up in the instant before he hit the ground. He knew. You always woke up in the instant before you hit the ground. And if you don't, the voice asked. It, and the ground was closer now. Still far, far away, 1,000 miles away, but closer than it had been. It was cold here in the darkness. There was no sun, no stars, only the ground below, coming up to smash him, and the grey mists, and the whispering voice. He wanted to cry. Not cry. Fly. I can't fly, Bran said. I can't. How do you know? Have you ever tried? The voice was high and thin. Bran looked around to see where it was coming from. A crow was spiraling down with him, just out of reach, following him as he fell. Help me, he said. I am trying, the crow replied. Say, got any corn? Bran reached into his pocket, and the darkness spun dizzily around him. When he pulled his hand out, golden kernels slid from between his fingers into the air. They fell with him. The crow landed on his hand and began to eat. Are you really a crow? Bran asked. Are you really falling? The crow asked back. It's just a dream, Bran said. Is it? Asked the crow. I'll wake up when I hit the ground, Bran told the bird. You'll die when you hit the ground, the crow said. It went back to eating corn. Bran looked down. He could see mountains now, their peaks white with snow, and the silver thread of rivers in the dark woods. He closed his eyes and began to cry. That won't do any good, the crow said. I told you, the answer is flying, not crying. How hard can it be? I'm doing it. The crow looked to the air and flapped around Bran's hand. You have wings, Bran pointed out. Maybe you do too. Bran felt along his shoulders, groping for feathers. There are different kinds of wings, the crow said. Bran was staring at his arms, his legs. He was so skinny, just skin stretched out over bones. Had he always been so thin? He tried to remember. His face was swam his a face swam up at him out of the gray mist, shining with light, golden. The things I do for love, it said. Bran screamed. The crow took to the air, calling. Not that, it shrieked at him. Forget that. You do not need it now. Put it aside. Put it away. It landed on Bran's shoulders and pecked at him, and the shining golden face was gone. Bran was falling faster than ever. The gray mist howled around him as he plunged towards the earth below. What are you doing to me? He asked the crow, tearful. Teaching you how to fly. I can't fly. You're flying right now. I'm falling. Every flight begins with a fall, the crow said. Look down. I'm afraid. Look down. Bran looked down and felt his insides turn to water. The ground was rushing up at him now. The whole world was spread out below him, the tapestry of white and brown and green. He could see everything so clearly that for a moment he forgot to be afraid. He could see the whole realm and everyone in it. He saw Winterfell as the eagles see it. The tall towers, looking squat and stubby from above. The castle walls, just lines in the dirt. He saw Maester Luwin on his balcony, studying the sky through a polished bronze tube and frowning as he made notes in a book. He saw his brother Robb, taller and stronger than he remembered him, practicing swordplay in the yard with real steel in his hand. He saw Hordor, the simple giant from the stables, carrying an anvil to Mikken's forge, hefting it into his shoulder as easily as another man might heft a bale of hay. And the heart of the gods would. The great white weirwood brooded over its reflection in the black pool, its leaves rustling in a chill wind. When it felt Bran watching, it uh, lifted its eyes from the still waters and stared back at him knowingly. He looked east. He saw a galley racing across the waters of the Bight. He saw his mother sitting alone in a cabin, looking at a blood-stained knife on the table in front of her. As the rowers pulled at their oars and Sir Roderick leaned across the rail, shaking and heaving, a storm was gathering ahead of them, a vast dark roaring lashed by lightning, but somehow they could not see it. He looked south, and he saw the great blue-green rush of the Trident. He saw his father pleading with the king, his face etched in grief. He saw Sansa crying herself to sleep that night, and he saw Arya watching in silence and holding her secrets hard in her heart. There were shadows all around him. One shadow was dark as ash, with the terrible face of a hound. Another was armored like the sun, golden and beautiful, and both of them loomed a giant in armor made of stone. When he opened his visor, there was nothing inside but darkness and thick black blood. He lifted his eyes and saw clear across the narrow sea, to the free cities and the green Dothraki Sea and beyond, to bathe Thrak under its mountain, to the fabled lands of the Jade Sea, to Ashai by the shadow, where dragons stirred beneath the sunrise. Finally, he looked north. He saw the wild shining like blue crystal, and his bastard brother John sleeping alone in a cold bed, his skin growing pale and hard as the memory of all warmth fled from him. And he looked past the wall, past endless forests cloaked in snow, past the frozen shore and the great blue-white rivers of ice and the dead plains where nothing grew or lived, north and north and north. He looked to the curtain of light at the end of the world, and then, beyond that curtain, he looked deep into the heart of winter, and then he cried out, afraid, and the heat of his tears burned his cheek. Now you know, the crowd whispered, as it sat on his shoulder. Now you know why you must live. Why? Bran said, not understanding. Falling, falling, because winter is coming. Bran looked at the crow on his shoulder, and the crow looked back. It had 3 eyes, and the third eye was full of terrible knowledge. Bran looked down. There was nothing below him now but snow and cold and death. A frozen wasteland where jagged blue-white spires of ice waited to embrace him. They flew up at him like spears. He saw the bones of 1,000 other dreamers impaled upon their points. He was desperately afraid. Can a man still be brave if he's afraid? He heard his own voice saying, small and far away, and his father's voice replies to him, that's the only time a man can be brave. Now, Bran, the crow urged, choose, fly or die. Death reached for him, screaming. Bran spread his arms and flew. Wings unseen drank the wind and filled and pulled him upward. The terrible needles of ice receded below him. The sky opened up above. Bran soared. It was better than climbing. It was better than anything. The world grew small beneath him. I'm flying, he cried out in delight. I've noticed, said the three-eyed crow. I took to the It took to the air, flapping its wings in his face, slowing him, blinding him. He faltered in the air as its pinions beat against his cheeks. Its beak stabbed at him fiercely, and Brown felt a sudden blinding pain in the middle of his forehead, between his eyes. What are you doing? He shrieked. The crow opened its beak and cawed at him. A shrill scream of fear, and the grey mists shuddered and swirled around him, a ripped wail like a veil. When he saw that the crow was really a woman, a serving woman with long black hair, he knew her from somewhere. From Winterfell, yes. That was it. He remembered her now, and then he realized he was in Winterfell, in a bed high in some chilly tower room, and the black-haired woman dropped a basin of water to shatter on the floor and ran down the steps shouting, He's awake! He's awake! He's awake! Bran touched his forehead, between his eyes. The place where the crow had pecked him was still burning, but there was nothing there. No blood, no wound. He felt weak and dizzy. He tried to get out of bed, but nothing happened. And then there was a movement beside the bed, and something lighted lightly on his legs. He felt nothing. A pair of yellow eyes looked into his own, shining like the sun. The window was open, and it was cold in the room, but the warmth that came off the wolf enfolded him like a hot bath. His pup, Bran realized, or was it? He was so big now. He reached out to pet him, his hand trembling like a leaf. His brother Rob burst into the room, breathless from his dash up the tower steps. The wolf was licking Bran's face. Bran looked up calmly. His name is Summer, he said. Okay, short chapter, really fucking cool regardless. At the end of the day, like, God, I love this chapter so much for so many reasons. As I said, the walls reflect the children. You could argue that Sansa is not a wolf, so hers dies. And I really like that Bran, when he wakes up, he sees Wolf and thinks, he's so big now, because now, like, every time we've seen Bran, he's been a child. He's been a gentle, like, loving laugh-filled child. And now that this happened to him and that he's been going like, it's a metaphor, he's growing up. You know, he's probably still a child. He's probably still very immature in many ways, but he's gonna grow up. We can see that now from his wolf. And I like that the first thing he does is give him a name. His name is Summer because of how warm he was, the way the way that that he was basically the opposite of Winter. I think that for a Stark of Winterfell, that's an appropriate and pretty cool name uh, for a wolf, of course. Um, so yeah, I like that. I really like this chapter. I really like that we see a lot of things. Bran clearly sees things that are happening at the same time. He sees his mother in a boat with Sir Roderick, and he sees that a storm is coming, but they can't see it yet. He sees Sansa crying, and Arya with secrets, and Ned pleading with the king. He sees the East. He sees the North. He sees Jon Snow, and he sees, the Wall, and to the north of the Wall, when he tries to see, all he sees is a light, and all of a sudden, after looking at the north of the Wall, all he sees is cold and death. You know. And I really like that. We've already been introduced to the others in the prologue chapter. And we know that they are beyond the Wall, and that's amazing. We see what Bran at the end of the day. We see Bran see this. The moment he sees up there, all of a sudden everything is all he can see is that, and I love that. Yeah, we see a lot of interesting things. What's up with the crow that's in his dreams? How come he can see all the things that are happening? And I really like how calm he is. Like, he's been in a coma, but he doesn't ask questions. He's not startled. Instead, he just kind of like if it's a way he's kind of acutely aware. He's like somehow aware of everything. And then all he says is, his name is Summer. Very calmly too, and I like that. I really like that. I think that's a cool. I don't know. I think that's just a cool moment. So yeah. Let's see. I don't know if I have time. Yeah, I should have time. The next chapter doesn't seem too long. Like 10, 11 pages. So yeah, I feel like let's do one more chapter and we're gonna end this stream. Okay, so we will make King's Landing within the hour. Catelyn turned away from the rail and forced herself to smile. Your men have done well by us, Captain. Each of them shall have a silver stag, as token of my gratitude. Captain Moria Tomets favored her with a bow. I'm sorry. You're far too generous, Lady Stark. The honor of carrying a great lady like yourself is all the reward they need. But they'll take the silver anyway. Moria smiled. As you say. He spoke the common tongue fluently, with only the slightest hint of a Tyroshi accent. He'd been plying the narrow sea for 30 years, he told her, as oarsman, quartersman, and finally captain of his own trading galleys. The Storm Dancer was his fourth ship, and his fastest, two-masted galley of 60 oars. Oh, like the Viking ships, that's cool. She had certainly been the fastest of the ships available in White Harbor when Catelyn and Sir Roderick Castle arrived after their headlong gallop downriver. The Tyroshi were notorious for their avarice, and Sir Roderick had argued for hiring a fishing sloop out of the Three Sisters, but Catelyn had insisted on the galley. It was good that she had. The winds had been against them much of the voyage, and without the galley's oars, they'd still be beating their way past the fingers instead of skimming towards King's Landing toward King's Landing and a journey's end. So close, she thought. Beneath the linen bandages, her fingers still throbbed where the dagger had bitten. The pain was her scourge, Catelyn felt. lest she forget. She could not bend the last two fingers of her hand, and the others would never again be dexterous. Yet, that was small enough price to pay for Bran's life. Sir Roderick chose that moment to appear on deck. My good friend, said Morio through his fourth green beard, the Tyroshi loved bright colors, even in their facial hair. It is so fine to see you looking better. Yes, Sir Roderick agreed. I haven't wanted to die for almost 2 days now. He bowed to he bowed to Catelyn. My lady, he was looking better. A shade thinner than he had been when they set out from White Harbor, but almost himself again. The strong winds in the bite and the roughness of the narrow sea had not agreed with him, and he'd almost gone over the side when the storm seized him unexpectedly off Dragonstone. Yet somehow he had clung to a rope until three of Morio's men could rescue him and carry him safely below deck. The captain was just telling me that our voyage is almost at an end, she said. Sir Roderick managed a wry smile. So soon? He looked odd without his great white side whiskers, smaller somehow, less fierce, and 10 years older. Yet, back on the bite, it had seemed prudent to submit to a crewman's razor. After his whiskers had become hopelessly befouled for the same time, while he leaned over the rail and retched into those swirling winds. I will leave you to discuss your business, Captain Morio said. He bowed and took his leave of them. The galley skimmed the water like a dragonfly, her oars rising and falling in perfect time. Sir Roderick held the rail and looked out over the passing shore. I have not been the most valiant of protectors. Catelyn touched his arms. We are here, Sir Roderick, and safely. This is all that truly matters. Her hand groped beneath her cloak, her fingers stiff and fumbling. The dagger was still at her side. She found she had to touch it now and then to reassure herself. Now we must reach King's land. The king. Now we must reach the king's master at arms, and pray that he can be trusted. Sir Aaron's Sir Aaron Santagar is a vain man, but an honest one. Sir Roderick's hand went to his face to stroke his whiskers and discovered once again that they were gone. He looked nonplussed. You may know the blade, yes, but, my lady, the moment we go ashore, we are at risk. And there are those, of course, who will know you on sight. Catelyn's mouth grew tight. Littlefinger, she murmured. His face swam up before her. A boy's face, though. He was a boy no longer. His father had died several years before, so he was Lord Baelish now, yet still they called him Littlefinger. Her brother Edmure had given him that name long ago in Riverrun. His family's modest holdings were on the smallest of the fingers, and Peter had been slight and short for his age. So Roderick cleared his throat. Lord Baelish once, his throat trailed off uncertainly in search of a polite word. Catelyn was past delicacy. He was my father's ward. We grew up together in Riverrun. I thought of him as a brother, but his feelings for me were more than brotherly. When it was announced that I was to wed Brandon Stark, Peter challenged for the right to my hand. It was madness. Brandon was 20, Peter was scarcely 15. I had to beg Brandon to spare Peter's life. He left him off with a scar. Afterwards, my father sent him away. I have not seen him since. She lifted her face to the spray as if the brisk wind could blow the memories away. He wrote to me at Riverrun after Brandon was killed, but I burned the letter unread. By then, I knew that Ned would marry me in his brother's place. So Roderick's fingers fumbled once again for non-insistent whiskers. Littlefinger sits on the small council now. I knew he would rise high, Catelyn said. He was always clever, even as a boy. But it is one thing to be clever and another to be wise. I wonder what the years have done to him. High overhead, the far eyes sang out from the rigging. Captain Morio came scrambling across the deck, giving orders, and all around them the storm's dancer burst into frantic activity as King's Landing slid into view atop its three high hills. 300 years ago, Catelyn knew, those heights had been covered with forest, and only a handful of fisherfolk had lived on the northern shore of the Blackwater Rush, where the where the deep, swift river flowed into the sea. Then Aegon the Conqueror had sailed from Dragonstone. I'm sorry. No, yes, then Aegon the Conqueror had sailed from Dragonstone. It was here that his army had put ashore, and there on the highest hill that he built his first crude red redoubt of wood and earth. Not sure what a redoubt is. Sorry, I'm guessing it's like fortress. Now the city covered the shore as far as Catelyn could see, manses and arbors and granaries, brick store brick storehouses and timbered inns and merchants' stalls, taverns and graveyards and brothels, all piled on one another. She could hear the clamor of the market, even at this distance. Between the buildings, between the buildings were broad roads lined with trees, wandering crookback streets, and alleys so narrow that two men could not walk abreast. Visenia's hill was crowned by the great sept of Baelor, with its seven crystal towers. Across the city on the hill of Rhaenys stood the blackened walls of the dragon pit, its huge dome collapsing into ruin, its bronze doors closed now for a century. The street of the sisters ran between them, straight as an arrow. The city wall rose in the distance, high and strong. 100 quays lined the waterfront, and the harbor was crowned with ships. Deep water fishing boats and river runners came and went. Ferrymen pulled back and forth across the Blackwater Rush, trading galleys, unloaded goods from Bravos and Pentas and Lys. Catelyn spied the Queen's ornate barge, tied up beside a fat-bellied whaler from the port of Even, its hull black with tar, while upriver a dozen lean golden warships rested in their cribs, sails furled and cruel iron rams leaping at the water. And above it all, frowning down from Aegon's high hill, was the Red Keep. Seven huge drum towers crowned with iron ramparts, an immense grim barbican, bolted halls and covered bridges, barracks and dungeons and granaries, massive curtained walls studded with archers' nests, all fashioned of pale red stone. Aegor the Conqueror had commanded it built. His son Maegor the Cruel had seen it completed. Afterwards, he had taken the heads of every stonemason, woodworker, and builder who had labored on it. Only the blood of the dragon would ever know the secrets of the fortress the dragon lords had built, he vowed. Yet now the banners that flew from its battlements were golden, not black, and where the three-headed dragon had once breathed fire, now pranced the crowned stag of House Baratheon. A high-masted swan ship from the Summer Isles was beaten out from port, its white sails huge with wind. The storm dancer moved past it, pulling steadily for shore. My lady, Sir Roderick said, I have thought of how best to proceed while I lay abed. You must not enter the castle. I will go in your stead and bring Sir Aaron to you in some safe place. She startled the old knight as a, the great drew as the great galley drew near to appear. Moria was shouting in the vulgar Valyrian of the free cities. You would be as much at risk as I would. Sir Roderick smiled. I think not. I looked at my reflection in the water earlier and scarcely recognized myself. My mother was the last person to see me without whiskers, and she is 40 years dead. I believe I'm safe enough, my lady. Mario bellowed a command, as 160 oars lifted from the river, then reversed and backed water. The galley slowed. Another shout. The oars slid back inside the hull. As they thumped against the dock, Tyroshi seamen kept down their to tie up. Morio came bustling up, all smiles. King's Landing, my lady, as you did command, and never has a ship made a swifter or surer passage. Will you will you be needing assistance to carry your things to the castle? We shall not be going to the castle. Perhaps you can suggest an inn, some place clean and comfortable, and not too far from the river. The Tyroshi fingered his fourth green beard. Just so. I know of several establishments that might suit your needs. Yet first, if I may be so bold, there is the matter of the second half of the payment we agreed upon. and of course, of the extra silver you were so kind as to promise. 60 stacks, I believe it was, for the oarmen, kindly reminded him. Oh, of a certainty, said Morio, though perhaps I should hold it for them until we return to Tyrosh, for the sake of their wives and children. If you give them the silver here, my lady, they will dice it away or spend it on all for a night's pleasure. There are worse things to spend money on, Sir Roderick put in. Winter is coming. A man must make his own choices, Catelyn said. They earn the silver. How they spend it is no concern of mine. As you say, my lady, Moria replied, bowing and smiling. Just to be sure, Catelyn paid the oarmen herself, a stack to each man, not a copper to the two men who carried their chests halfway up Besinia's hill, to the inn that Morio had suggested. It was a rambling old place on Eel Alley. The woman who owned it was a sour crone with a wandering eye, who looked them over suspiciously and bit the coin that Catelyn offered her to make sure it was real. Her rooms were large and airy, though, and Morio swore that her fish stew was the most savory in all the Seven Kingdoms. Best of all, she had no interest in their names. I think it best if you stay away from the common room, Sir Roderick said, after they had settled in. Here in a place like this, no one knows who may be watching. He wore ringmail, dagger, and longsword under a dark cloak with a hood he could pull up over his head. I will be back before night falls, with Sir Aaron, he promised. Rest now, my lady. Catelyn was tired. The voyage had been long and fatiguing, and she was no longer as young as she had been. Her windows opened on an alley and rooftops, with a view of the black water beyond. She watched Sir Roderick set off, striding briskly through the through the busy streets until he was lost in the crowds. Then decided to take his advice. The bedding was stuffed with straw instead of feathers, but she had no trouble falling asleep. She walked to a pounding on her door. Catelyn sat up sharply. Shut up, Jesus Christ! Sat up sharply outside the window. The room, the rooftops of King's Landing were red in the light of the setting sun. She had slept longer than she intended. A fist hammered on at her door again. Door again. A voice called out, "Open in the name of a king!" A moment, she called out. She wrapped herself in her cloak. The dagger was beside the table. She snatched it up before she unlatched the heavy wooden door. The men who pushed into the room wore black ringmail and golden cloaks of the city watch. Their leader smiled at the dagger in her hand and said, "No need for that, my lady. We're to escort you to the castle." "By whose authority?" she said. He showed her. He showed her a ribbon. Catelyn felt her breath catch in her throat. The seal was a mockingbird in grey wax. "Peter," she said. "So soon. Something must have happened to Sir Roderick." She looked at the head guardsman. "Do you know who I am?" "No, my lady," he said. "My Lord Littlefinger said only to bring you to him, and see that you were not mistreated." Catelyn nodded. "You may wait outside while I dress." She bathed her hands in the basin and rubbed them in clear linen. Her fingers were thick and awkward as she struggled to lace up her this knot and wrap brown cloak about her face. How could Littlefinger have known she was here? Sir Roderick would have never told them. Old he might be, but he was stubborn and loyal to a fault. Were they too late? Had the Lannisters reached King's Landing before her? No, if that were true, Ned would be here too, and surely he would have come to her. How? Then she thought, Morio. The Tyroshi knew who they were and where they were. Damn him. She hoped he'd gotten a good price for the information. They had bought a horse for her. The lamps were being lit along the streets as they set out, and Catelyn felt the eyes of the city on her as she rode, surrounded by the guard of their golden cloaks. When they reached the Red Keep, the portcullis was down and the great gates sealed for the night. The castle windows were alight with flickering lights. The guardsmen left their mounts outside the walls and escorted her through a narrow postern door, then up endless steps to a tower. He was alone in the room, seated at a heavy wooden table, an oil lamp beside him as he wrote. When they unsheared her inside, he sat down his pen and looked at her. "Cat," he said quietly. Why have I been brought here in this fashion? He rose and gestured brusquely to the guards. Leave us. The man departed. Uh, you were not mistreated, I trust, he said after they had gone. I gave firm instructions. He noticed her bandages. Your hands. Caroline ignored the implied question. I am not accustomed to being summoned like a serving wench, she said icily. As a boy, you still knew the meaning of courtesy. I've angered you, my lady. That was never my intention. He looked contrite. The look brought back vivid memories for Caroline. He had been a sly child, but after his mischiefs, he always looked contrite. It was a gift he had. The years had not changed him much. Peter had been a small boy, and he had grown into a small man, an inch or two shorter than Caroline, slender and quick, with the sharp features she remembered and the same laughing green gray eyes. He had a little pointed chin beard now, and threads of silver in his dark hair, though he was still shy of 30. They went well with the silver mocking hair that had fastened his cloak. Even as a child, he had always loved silver. How did you know I was in the city? She asked him. Lord Varys knows all, Peter said with a sly smile. He will be joining us shortly, but I wanted to see you alone first. Has been too long, Cat. How many years? Catelyn ignored his familiarity. There were more important questions. So it was the King Spider who found me. Littlefinger winced. You don't want to call him that. He's very sensitive. Comes of being eunuch. Eunuch. I'm sorry, I imagine. Nothing happens in this city without Varys knowing. Oftentimes he knows it before it happens. He has informants everywhere. His little birds, he calls them. One of his little birds heard about your visit. Thankfully, Varys came to me first. Why you? He shrugged. Why not me? I am the Master of Coin, the King's own counselor. Selmy and Lord Renly rode north to meet Robert, and Lord Stannis is gone to Dragonstone, leaving only Master Pycelle and me. I was the obvious choice. I was ever a friend to your sister Lysa. Varys knows that. Does Varys know about, or Varys knows everything, except why you are here. He lifted an eyebrow. Why are you here? A wife is allowed to yearn for her husband, and if a mother needs her daughter's clothes, who can tell her no? Littlefinger laughed. Oh, very good, my lady, but please don't expect me to believe that. I know you I know you too well. What were the Tully's words again? Her throat was dry. Family, duty, honor. She recited stiffly. He did know her too well. Family, duty, honor, he echoed. All of which required you to remain in Winterfell, where your hand left you. No, my lady, something has happened. This sudden trip of yours bespeaks of a certain urgency. I beg you, let me help. All sweet friends should never hesitate to rely upon each other. There was a soft knock on the door. Enter, Littlefinger called out. The man who stepped through the door was plump, perfumed, powdered, and hairless as an egg. He wore a vest of woven gold thread over a loose gown of purple silk, and on his feet were pointed slippers of soft velvet. Lady Stark, he said, taking her hand in both of his. To see you again after so many years is such a joy. His flesh was soft and moist. His breath smelled of lilacs. Oh, your poor hands. Have you burned yourself, sweet lady? The fingers are so delicate. Our good Maester Pycelle makes a marvelous salve. Shall I send for a jar? Catelyn slid her fingers from his grasp. I thank you, my lord, but my own Maester Lewin has already seen to my hurts. Varys bobbed his head. I was grievous sad to hear about your son. About him, so young. The gods are cruel. On that we agree, Lord Varys, she said. The title was but a courtesy due to him as a council member. Varys was a lord of nothing but the spider web, the master of none but his whispers. The eunuch spread his soft hands. On more than that, I hope. Sweet lady, I have great esteem for your husband, our new hand, and I know we do both love Kieran Robert. Yes, she was forced to say, for a certainty. Never has a king been so beloved as Robert, quipped oh, that little finger. Never has a king been so beloved as Robert, quipped Littlefinger. He smiled slyly. At least in Lord Varys, at least in Lord Varys' hearing. Good lady, Varys said with great solitude. There are men in the free cities with wondrous healing powers. Say only the word, and I will send for one for your dear Bran. Maester Lewin, Maester is doing all that can be done for Bran, she told them. She would not speak of Bran, not here, not with these men. She trusted Littlefinger only a little, and Varys not at all. She would not let them see her grief. Lord Baelish tells me that I have you to thank for bringing me here. Varys giggled like a little girl. Oh yes, I suppose I am guilty. I hope you forgive me, kind lady. He eased himself down into a seat and put his hands together. I wonder if we might trouble you to show us the dagger. Catelyn stared at the eunuch in a stunned disbelief. He was a spider, she thought wildly, and an enchanter or worse. He knew things no one could possibly know. Unless. What have you done to Sir Roderick? She demanded. Littlefinger was lost. I feel rather like the knight who arrives at the battle without his lance. What dagger are we talking about? Who is Sir Roderick? Sir Roderick Castle, Master at Arms at Winterfell. Varys informed him. I assure you, Lady Stark, nothing at all has been done to the good king, to the good knight. He did call here early this afternoon. He visited with Sir Aaron Santagar in the armory, and they talked of a certain dagger. About sunset, they left the castle together and walked to that dreadful hovel where you were staying. They are still there, drinking in the common room, waiting for your return. Sir Roderick was very distressed to find you gone. How could you know all that? The whisperings of little birds, Varys said, smiling. I know things, sweet lady. That is the nature of my service. He shrugged. You do have the dagger with you, yes? Catelyn pulled it out from beneath her cloak and threw it down on the table in front of him. Here, perhaps your little birds will whisper the name of the man it belongs to. Varys lifted the knife with exaggerated delicacy and ran a thumb along its edge. Blood welled, and he let out a squeal and dropped the dagger back on the table. Careful, Catelyn told him. It's sharp. Nothing holds an edge like Valyrian steel, Littlefinger said, as Varys sucked at his bleeding thumb and looked at Catelyn with sullen admonition. Littlefinger hefted the knife lightly in his hand, testing the grip. He flipped it in the air, cut it again with his other hand. Such sweet balance. You want to find the honor is the reason for this visit. You have no need for Sir Iron for that, my lady. Uh, you should have come to me. And if I had, she said, what would you have told me? I would have told you that there was only one knife like this in King's Landing. He grasped the blade between the thumb and forefinger, drew it back over his shoulder, and threw it across the room with practiced flick of his wrist. It struck the door and buried itself deep in the oak, quivering. It's mine. Yours? It made no sense. Peter had not been at Winterfell. Until the tourney on Prince Joffrey's name day, he said, crossing the room to wrench the dagger from the wood. I bet Sir Jaime in the jousting, along with half the court. Peter's cheapest grin made him look half a boy again. When Loras Tyrell unhorsed him, many of us became a trifle poorer. Sir Jaime lost 100 golden dragons, the Queen lost an emerald pendant, and I lost my knife. Her Grace got the emerald back, but the winner kept the rest. Who? Catelyn demanded, her mouth dry with fear. Her fingers ached with remembered pain. The imp, said Littlefinger as Lord Varys watched her face. Tyrion Lannister. Okay, so we find out that the dagger is Tyrion's, and not just that, but which is odd because first of all, we have not seen any of that in Tyrion's chapter, even in his thoughts and point of view. He's never seen anything. The first interaction we see with him, he's sympathetic towards Bran. You know, he defends him towards. He tells Joffrey to go and pay a visit to Lady Catelyn and Ned. he talks about, to Jamie. Jamie's like, oh, I would have put him out of his misery. And Tyrion is like, speaking for broken things and whatnot. He defends him. He seems to be on Bran's side. So this is how quite the revelation. Why would Tyrion's dagger be used to try and kill Bran? You know. So yeah, it's a very interesting chapter all around. We see that Varys knows everything apparently, and yeah, very cool all around. Great introduction to Littlefinger and Varys. I love it. But well, that being said, I think I'm gonna end the stream here. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you for joining me in this reading of Game of Thrones. Even if you're watching the VOD, I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you're having fun with the book. And yeah, let's hope we get let's hope we can spread more to the joys of this novel to more people, because I think it is, excuse me, I think it is a very good book. I think it's worth being read and being known about by people, of just how well it's written, how cool, how important some of its themes and some of its messages can be. you know but a lot of that comes later on in the book. We're still pretty early on. We're still not even, maybe we're like a fourth, maybe a little bit, maybe a chapter or more before we're a fourth of the way through the book. So yeah, we're still pretty early on. But yeah, well, that being said, again, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the stream. And I hope I can earn your support. And thank you for coming. Later on today, I will have, like, in about 40 minutes, I will have another stream. That one's in Spanish, but you're welcome to join me if you want. That one's gonna be me playing Ori. So thank you so much, and I hope I'll see you. I hope I'll see you again. Bye bye.